Hey, just wait. Page 15. Now, do you see on page 15, starting in a statement by Dr. Oziel that begins on line 12, that he sort of shifts gears in the middle of this statement. He starts out saying one thing, and then he changes the subject.
Yes.
Okay. First, he starts out with talking about strike that. Preceding this, there's been a discussion by Lyle Menendez of how his father talked to him about the nature of his marital relationship, how he had to control every aspect of it, or he didn't want to be married, basically.
Correct, yes.
Okay. And that was a discussion about the parents' marriage.
Yes.
And the father's belief that he had a right to totally control the marriage.
Yes.
And do you see in this statement by Dr. Oziel that first he comments on what Lyle has just told him,
Yes.
and then he changes the subject?
Yes.
And what does he change the subject to?
He changes the subject to getting back to how much, it starts on line 15, is now for them or for Lyle to talk about how much killing your dad because of what he was doing and how much do you feel you were doing it for other reasons. So he begins to question Lyle regarding the killing.
Well, isn't the question, though, how much were you killing your dad because of what he was doing to you?
Yes, he says that.
Or what he was doing to your mother?
That's right, and then what part of each. He's asking for this breakdown.
Yeah, what part was because of what he was doing to your mother versus what part was he doing to you? Is that what the question appears to be?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And that's following a discussion about the father's control of the mother.
Yes.
Is that right? Okay. And does Lyle reject part of this suggestion of Dr. Oziel's that the father was killed for what he was doing to the sons?
Yes, he rejects part of that, yes, in that first line on 21.
He says it was not because of what he was doing to me.
Yes.
And now that doesn't sound like a statement by Lyle Menendez that he killed his father because he was domineering and controlling and overpowered his life and gave him no freedom and he just couldn't live, or any of that stuff, does it?
No, it doesn't.
Objection sustained. The answer is stricken.
You familiar with Dr. Oziel's testimony in this case?
Yes, I am.
And does this statement by Lyle Menendez that it was not because of what he was doing to me, is that consistent or inconsistent with Dr. Oziel's testimony?
Sustained.
And now, is there a colloquy here on page 15 following that Lyle Menendez saying it was not because of what he was doing to me, where Lyle talks about how he wanted to separate from the family, didn't want any more money, didn't want to have anything to do with them, wanted to be self-supported?
Yes, that's what he continues talking about.
So he doesn't follow up on Dr. Oziel's suggestion at this point that killing the father had anything whatsoever to do with him?
Correct.
Now, looking at page 16, line 20, is there, that's the beginning of a statement by Lyle Menendez.
Yes.
Is there another one of these clues or cues starting on line 21?
Yes, there is.
And what is the clue on line 21?
It's where Lyle Menendez says, I couldn't let him get away with this.
And does it, in analyzing this from the standpoint of therapy, can you understand from the context what it is that Lyle Menendez is talking about? Getting away with what?
Right, you don't know that this doesn't have any reference.
Well, isn't it following a discussion about what the father is doing to the mother?
Yes, that's true.
But is the problem with that that's old news?
That's old news, yes.
How old?
1987.
And is it something as a therapist, if someone told you that he killed someone because he couldn't let him get away with this, and this is 2.5 years ago, is that a clue you'd want to follow up?
Yes, definitely.
Could it mean another this? I couldn't let him get away with something else he was doing?
Yes.
And could it even mean, in a metaphorical sense, something else he's doing to somebody else?
Yes, it could.
Sustained. The answer is stricken.
Now, did you, in looking over this transcript, formed the opinion that there were times when Lyle Menendez is using the word mother as a metaphor for brother.
Yes, there were.
And is this one of the areas, both with this statement of Lyle Menendez starting on line 20 and the follow-up statement he makes starting on line 26, a place where you're interpreting that he could be referring to what was happening to his brother rather than what was happening to his mother?
Sustained as to the form of the question, it's also leading.
Is it an appropriate interpretive skill for a therapist to try to interpret what the metaphors may mean?
Yes, it definitely is.
And did you, in applying that skill, interpret these metaphors in these statements of Lyle Menendez?
Yes, I did.
And how did you interpret them?
That is an interpretation.
You're actually asking her the process she used to do this interpretation?
No, I'm
Not any
asking her what her
conclusion?
interpretive conclusion was.
Well, let's see what her process was first,
Okay.
and how she did this.
Well, the process would be that there is statements that are made that are dated, and then there are vague statements that are made that need to be followed up on, and that when it continues between pages 16 and 17, it really needs to be clarified. There's just too much that's not clear that would require some more exploration.
Okay. Okay.
He even gives, I mean, there's just more language there that you'd want to follow up on.
What's the language you'd want to, I think we need a break, Your Honor. I think we need to follow up on the need for a break at this moment.
Okay?
Thank you.
All right. Okay,
I
we'll take our recess, and we'll resume at 3:30. Ladies and gentlemen, don't discuss the matter with anyone. Don't form any final opinions about it. We'll resume. You may continue your direct examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. I believe we were on page 17. Now, actually, starting at the bottom of page 16, there is a statement by Lyle Menendez. He's talking about something for his mother's sake, and then up to the top of page 17, he states that my father should be killed, there's no question. What he's doing, he's impossible to live with for myself and for myself based on what he's doing to my mother. Okay?
Yes.
Now, that, in listening to that and in reading it, does it appear that Lyle Menendez is talking in the present tense as of the time that the father's killed, what he is doing to my mother, not what he did do to my mother?
Correct.
Object, improper opinion.
The objection is sustained. The answer is stricken. You're asking whether or not he was using a present tense and the words he was using at the time?
Well, I'm asking whether she interpreted it as the present tense and whether that had significance to her. That was my next question.
When you say interpreted, you mean the grammar is the present tense?
Well, yeah, whether it sounds like the present tense, whether that's how she understood it, whether that's what she's basing, which is
Well,
basically...
those are separate things, whether you're going beyond the meaning of the words to the intent of the person speaking. So
No.
what is it that you're asking?
I'm asking if the plain meaning of the words as you heard it made it sound like he's talking about the present tense, what he's doing to my mother at the time that he is killed. Is that what you understood him to be saying?
At the time, correct.
At the time the father's killed?
Yes.
Okay. And did you consider this statement by Lyle Menendez, based on what he's doing to my mother, a potential metaphor?
Yes, I did.
And a metaphor for what?
Metaphor for brother.
And in the next line, line 9, does Dr. Oziel do something that at first looks appropriate?
Yes, he does.
What does he do?
Yes, he picks up on the statement based on what? So he is following the patient, and that's
Okay.
quite appropriate.
Okay. And if he had stopped there and actually asked the patient based on what, would that be the kind of technique that you would teach?
Yes.
Does he, however, stop there and wait for an answer? Too fast?
No, I just got distracted, I'm sorry. Based on that, it was your last question, I'm sorry.
Okay. To summarize it, it would be appropriate for a therapist, after a patient has used language based on what he's doing to my mother, for a
Yes.
therapist to say, based on what? Picking up the language of the patient.
Yes.
Okay. And if Dr. Oziel had stopped there and waited for Lyle Menendez to answer, would that be appropriate therapeutic technique?
Yes, it would be.
Does Dr. Oziel, though, stop and wait for Lyle Menendez to answer?
No, he doesn't.
What does he do?
He answers his own question. He
And-
then continues to give his own interpretation, his own language, his own, on all of these things that he wants, and then before he even finishes, he does one more thing. He
What does he-
changes the subject, and he asks another question about the disinheriting.
Okay, so first what he does after he answers his own question, he answers it by describing a person, from
Yes.
totally controlling everybody, being completely cold-blooded. Who's he describing there? And it's the father.
It's the father he's describing on the cold-blooded, yes.
Okay. And then he changes the subject to the father having said that he disinherited the sons.
Yes.
And does Lyle respond to this colloquy of Dr. Oziel's having to do with inheritance?
Yes, he does give an answer.
And does this answer accept Dr. Oziel's theory about the father being bad because he disinherited them, or does he reject it?
No, he rejects it. He does not agree with Dr. Oziel.
And he does not agree, therefore, that there is a problem with the father because of the disinherited.
That's correct.
Now, is there a point farther down on that page, though, where Lyle does, if you will, pick up on the theme of, or part of the theme of Dr. Oziel, that his father is a certain kind of person?
Yes, he does.
And what language does Lyle use to describe his father, looking, if you will, on line 26?
He uses the word overpowering
He uses the word strong as well.
and strong and ideal a little bit earlier.
He calls him the ideal father?
Yes.
And strong and overpowering.
Yes.
Does he use the words domineering?
No, he does not.
Does he use the word controlling?
No, he does not.
At any time, in fact, Dr. Burgess, in examining this entire conversation, does either Erik or Lyle Menendez refer to their father as domineering or controlling?
No, they do not.
And does Dr. Oziel use controlling liberally in describing the father?
Yes, he does.
Now, turning to page 18, is there something significant, first of all, on line 4, in Lyle talking about the killing of the parents in a significant way? I'm calling your attention to the phrase, this thing that was necessary.
Yes, line 4.
And from a therapeutic standpoint, is his use of the word necessary in the context of this supposed discussion about a mercy killing, is that a significant clue?
Yes, it is.
Does Dr. Oziel pick up on it?
No, he does not.
And is it significant on line 6 that Lyle Menendez says he, meaning the father, had trained us like basic training?
Yes.
And is that something that a therapist presented with two children of a family who have killed a parent, and now one of those children is describing his life as basic training? Is that significant?
Yes, that's very significant.
Why?
It refers now to the whole childhood and brings up that as the full experience, and it needs to be gone into in terms of what that's a fully explorable area.
Is basic training a description of what anybody involved in child development would call a healthy or a normal or a typical way of raising kids?
No, it isn't.
And is that a clue there that something may have been wrong here?
Yes.
And does Dr. Oziel respond, at least, to this statement that for 21 years, Lyle saying that his life for 21 years was a basic training course?
Yes, Dr. Oziel does.
And he responds by asking basic training to do what?
To do what, right?
Is that an appropriate response? To do what?
It doesn't show, for someone that's supposed to have some skills, it doesn't seem to be the most logical thing to say, but he does try to explore it.
Is it consistent throughout that Dr. Oziel constantly tries to shift the discussion to why the parents were killed and
Yes.
talk about the killing?
Objection calls for a conclusion on part of the witness.
Sustained. The answer is right.
Have you found any place in this transcript where, without Dr. Oziel's prodding or suggestion to discuss the killing, that either of the defendants bring up the killing?
Objection calls for a conclusion on part of the witness.
Sustained.
Was it significant to forming your opinions about the appropriateness of this therapeutic session or its reliability as a truth-determining device that Dr. Oziel is the one who's constantly shifting the discussion to killing the parents?
Objection compounding proper opinion.
And it assumes facts, not evidence.
Well, I'd like to get the fact and evidence. if I could ask the original question, then did you analyze the entire transcript and the entire tape to see who, if there is just one person, keeps bringing up the killing?
Overall, you can answer that question.
Yes, I did.
And who keeps bringing it up?
Dr. Oziel.
And does he even change the subject of what either of the defendants is
Okay,
talking
let's
about?
not lead the witness.
Okay. Does he bring it up in context, or does he bring it up out of context?
He brings it up out of context.
Now, following along on page 18, starting at line 9, does Lyle Menendez respond to Dr. Oziel's question about basic training to do what? With a statement about survival.
Yes, he does.
And is a statement about survival, when made by a child of a family where the children have killed the parents, a significant statement?
Yes, it is.
And if you were training a therapist on how to explore a patient telling you they were trained to survive, what would you tell them to ask?
The question that should come in here is to ask about survive in terms of the survival aspect. What, how, get the own experience. What was prompting that survival statement?
In other words, what was happening that made you feel you were
Yes.
trained to survive?
Yes.
Is that what Dr. Oziel does?
No, he again brings in, on line 10, he suggests two possibilities in his statement, by living without him or by killing him. So that comes in again.
And do both Erik Menendez and Lyle Menendez answer him?
Yes.
And in answering him, do they reject the notion that survival was by killing him?
Objection calls for a proper opinion by the witness.
Sustained.
Lyle Menendez says...
How do they answer the question?
Yeah, exactly. How do they answer it?
Yes, they reject this.
Lyle says
Described
it's...
as a conclusion on the part of the witness.
Sustained. The answer is stricken.
Just indicate what it is that Lyle says. When given these two options by Dr. Oziel, which one does he choose?
Lyle Menendez says on line 13, by living without him.
And then does Dr. Oziel do something inappropriate, starting at line 16?
Yes.
And how would you characterize what he's doing here?
What he is doing here, he starts arguing now with him, and he brings in his own theory. He says because you've never really lived with him anyway. He doesn't in any way explore what Lyle Menendez has just said, and starts trying to interject his theory on this father-son closeness, this bond, this earlier statement that goes back to the earlier pages of the tape.
Where Lyle is talking about how he thought he was the ideal father?
Yes.
And Dr. Oziel is trying to discount that?
Yes, he is.
And does Lyle Menendez agree with him?
Lyle Menendez does, yes, on line 21. He first agrees, where he says, yeah, exactly, I mean. Then we have a statement where Erik Menendez comes in, and then Lyle comes back again and disagrees, saying, I felt the bond, though.
So Dr. Oziel is trying to say that there was no bond, there was nothing between you and your father, and basically Lyle rejects that and says, I felt a bond with my father.
Yes.
Now, when you listen to this section of the tape, based on the tone of voice and the way that Dr. Oziel was following up on statements made by the brothers, was he doing something vis-a-vis the fact of the homicide that you thought was highly inappropriate?
Yes.
What was he doing that for a therapist you would consider highly inappropriate?
What he was doing was to encourage the talk, it really was encouraging that two things. One, that it not be fully explored, and second of all, he was approving in a certain way.
He was approving of homicide?
Yes.
Is that appropriate for a therapist?
No, it's not.
In your training and the training that you give to your students, in a circumstance like this, where you're faced with patients who have done something bad, I suppose is as good a word as any,
Yes.
and there's expressions of regret and guilt and remorse, what is the appropriate goal of the therapy?
Appropriate goal of the therapist would be to get the patient to come to grips with that and what the next step is going to be in terms of the guilt and the remorse, and to
What-
move forward with this, not to keep it covered up.
And what is the appropriate next step, the ethical appropriate next step for a therapist to be working on with a patient like this?
Objection irrelevant.
Overall.
The next step is to come forward with this to the police
For the patient to come forward?
Yes.
To encourage the patient to come forward?
with the therapist support.
Is there anything in here that shows that Dr. Oziel was making any efforts to ready Lyle and Erik Menendez to come forward with this thing that they were feeling guilty about?
No.
Is there an indication in here that he is supporting a cover-up?
Yes, he is.
Objection, move to strike as a conclusion on the part of the witness.
Sustained. The answer is stricken.
Now, I want to turn your attention to page 19. And this is a long statement by Lyle Menendez following up on the notion that he felt a bond with his father. He's talking here about, I guess would you characterize this as the good times? Times
Yes.
that he remembers with his father
Yes.
that were positive for him?
Yes.
And do you see him talking about his difficulty with his father in trying to express his, meaning Lyle Menendez's, genuine feelings and genuine emotion of love for his father?
Yes.
And he's describing how his father can't handle that.
Yes.
Now, would that be a significant topic and area to explore with a young man who has confessed to you that he killed this very father?
Yes, it would be.
And with the fact that he's saying he loved this man and he had genuine emotions to him, something that would make you want to question why this killing happened?
Yes. His voice also changes. I think that's very important. That
At this
one time.
point in the
Yes.
tape, Lyle's
Between
voice
21
changed?
and 24, his voice becomes much softer and much more emotive.
Through most of this tape, would you characterize Lyle Menendez's voice as emotive?
No.
How would you characterize his voice, apart from the content?
Right. It's what we would call inhibited in terms of emotion. It is stoic. There is a kind of a stony monotone, matter-of-fact tone to it.
Does this tell you, when you listen to this, or as a therapist evaluating a patient, would this tell you, well, that must mean this patient doesn't feel any emotion or doesn't have any emotion?
No, that does not tell you that.
In this particular segment where he's actually describing emotions that he has, does the affect match the words?
Yes, it does.
Now, it's true, is it not, Dr. Burgess, that Erik Menendez on this tape, during the portion where he does the bulk of his talking, sounds very different than his brother?
Yes, he does.
And how would you describe how he sounds?
I'm sorry, the he being
Erik.
Erik sounds very emotive, has a lot of emotion, is crying. There's his tone is softer.
And does what he is saying match his being emotive about it?
Yes, it does.
Now, turning to page 20, and starting at line 7, there is this little speech here by Dr. Oziel, which starts out again with a question: why did your dad have to die?
Yes.
All right? And did this sound to you like Oziel doesn't have a clue?
Correct?
And he says, in fact, I know why your mom had to die. That's his mercy theory.
Yes.
Okay. But why did he have to die?
Yes.
Right? Okay. Does he give either Erik or Lyle a chance to answer that question?
No, he again answers his own question.
And in answering the question, does he assume that it had something to do with the two of them?
What he does here is he begins to pit the brothers against the father. That's what becomes clear in this little speech.
Is this similar to what he tried to do with respect to pitting them against the mother earlier in the session?
Yes.
In order to evoke some anger or hatred statements about the mother?
Yes.
And he failed in that effort, did he not?
Yes, he did.
And he fails here as well.
Objection sustained. The answer is stricken. We'll go to the next question.
Okay. Now, in this particular section, does Dr. Oziel do something else that in your training and in your background is considered unethical?
Yes.
What does he do here?
He brings up conversation from another therapy session, or another session, we'll call it, and he uses it in this session. So-
He brings up information apparently he had from the father privately, does he not?
Yes, this is a...
Objection, excuse me, Your Honor. The cause for facts not in evidence. Maybe approach.
Well, I think I can straighten it out, Your Honor. It's right in the context here.
Right, objection is sustained. The answer is stricken. Yes, you may
Okay.
proceed.
All right. Why don't you read through the, starting at the end of line 8. It's clear to me how much he totally controlled the two of you.
Yes?
And then he shifts, and it's also clear when he talk about you when you weren't here.
Yes.
Okay, now who do you think the he is? Who did you understand the he to be in reading this?
I understood the he to be the father,
And when you weren't here, who is the you?
meaning the brothers.
And then he goes on to say he, being the father, was derogated,
Yes.
a word, about both of you in different ways.
Yes.
And then he elaborates on that, saying the father was judgmental of them and said negative things about them.
Correct.
Behind their back.
Yes.
Now, is that ethical?
No, that is not ethical.
If Mr. Menendez had said something with Dr. Oziel and the boys weren't present, is it appropriate for him then to go to the children and tell them this?
No, it is not.
And even if he's dead, is it ethical when a patient or a person you've been consulting with dies to then blab to the world or blab what he said?
No, it is not.
Now, you say, though, that this is to pit them against their father.
Yes.
Why do you say that?
Because he's bringing information in about the father, and he's saying very negative things. He's saying with the father, the disappointments, that they were weak in a certain way, and saying things like you could never be good enough. So that is trying to evoke a reaction in the brothers by bringing this information in.
An angry reaction against the father.
Yes.
That's like telling a child, Johnny said that you did something wrong, to get the child angry at Johnny.
Let's go on to something else. Ask a different question, please.
Okay. It's just an analogy, Your Honor.
Yes, it's a metaphor.
No, it's an analogy. And with respect to that, does Lyle Menendez, and not respect to that, no, with respect to what Dr. Oziel was doing, does Lyle Menendez express anger?
He doesn't express anger. He agrees. If you see on line 22 and 23, he keeps talking about the father and what happened. He told Erik about, and he goes into it more.
Well, he's talking there, is he not, about the fact that the father was critical
Yes.
about the Calabasas issue, which is what you understand to be a theft from a home in Calabasas.
Yes.
Correct? And so he's agreeing with Dr. Oziel. Oh, yeah, I know my father was critical of us.
Yes.
So that's not like news, and it
No, and he doesn't get angry.
right. And then Dr. Oziel, though, following that, further characterizes what the father thought or felt about the children.
Yes.
He uses a derogatory term, does he not, on line 28?
Yes.
He calls them stupid.
Yes.
And Lyle Menendez hasn't said my father called us stupid. That's Oziel's word.
That's right.
Now, turning to page 21, just harkening back for a moment to 20, this particular colloquy began, did it not, with Dr. Oziel suggesting that the father had to die because of something having to do with the two of them?
Yes.
And now does Lyle ultimately respond to that suggestion in Dr. Oziel's previous speech?
Yes, he does.
And does he agree with that previous speech, or does he disagree?
He rejects it. He disagrees.
By saying he doesn't think it had anything to do with us.
Yes.
And he's still hooked into in this speech, it all had to do with how bad Dad was to Mom.
Yes.
And now he brings up this issue of politics.
Yes.
Dr. Burgess, do you understand this issue of politics as it's injected here? I mean, does this make any psychological sense to you as a therapist?
Objection irrelevant.
Is there anything about this issue of politics that should have been pursued?
Well, Dr. Oziel does interject and tries to continue it. We do see that on line 23. And then you see Lyle agreeing with the language of the word.
Dr. Oziel's word affair again.
Affair, right.
And Lyle agreeing with affair.
Yes.
But my question is, I guess, this. If you were in this situation and you have these two young men in front of you and they've killed their parents and they're talking about this theory that the mother was a mercy killing, and now the crisis is that Dad's going to go into politics. Okay?
Yes.
What kind of questioning would you want to do when presented with this, it was the politics theory?
Well, that's there's something new that's come in that either means it has to be looked at in terms of a level of meaning, but it doesn't get at what they're feeling. It's just a change of subject, and it could either be explored that way, would be one way of handling it, or just asking them outright, what does this have to do with what we're talking about? It clearly is a change of subject, so that could be explored.
On the face of it, does it rationally have anything to do with what they're talking about?
No, it doesn't.
Objection improper, hanging of strike.
You said you'd ask, what does it have to do with what we're talking about?
Yes.
Why would you ask that?
Objection irrelevant.
Because it is introduced, it is an issue that does come in, it's a spontaneous issue, so you would want to follow it up, but not to interject one's own language or one's own conclusion about it.
I guess my question is, does it make psychological sense to you as a therapist, this interjection of politics?
No, it doesn't. That's what I'm saying. It doesn't make sense, so it has to be explored as to what the meaning really is.
And following as it does with Lyle saying, no, it had nothing to do with us, it only had to do with Mom, then he changes the subject to this politics issue.
Yes, but you always want to look at what comes just before it, and the real critical thing, I think, is on line 9, where if you want to go after something, it's Erik and I getting together. That's an important statement, because it changes right after that.
Okay, so he seemed to be saying something and then he changed the
Yes.
subject? And is it significant when someone changes the subject to something that appears unrelated?
Yes.
That they may be avoiding what they started to say?
Yes, that's why you go back to what was said just before the change of subject.
And does Dr. Oziel say, what do you mean it was Erik and you getting together?
No, he follows this new line of inquiry.
About politics. Now, on page 22, looking at the statement that Lyle Menendez makes starting on line 6, he's sort of, again, ending up how politics was going to be his mother's doom. That's what it was all over.
Yes.
Right? Very dramatic language, would you agree?
Yes.
Then he says, there was no escape.
Yes.
Now, did you consider that significant, the notion of someone having no escape from this family?
Yes.
And does, in fact, Dr. Oziel on this occasion pick up?
Yes, he does.
And what does he say here?
Yes, he asks no escape from what?
Okay.
He repeats it twice.
And he repeats it twice, like he really doesn't know.
Yes.
Okay. And then, do you recall how Lyle Menendez sounds on the tape when he starts to answer this?
Yes.
And how would you describe how he sounds on the tape? He says, no escape from, being separate from my dad in an intimate environment?
Yes.
All right. How would you describe how he sounded?
There is a great pause there, and you actually can almost count. There is a real hesitation, which is unusual, coming from this, what we've already heard. And then he launches into the end of the sentence, where he actually takes language that we've heard before from Dr. Oziel, so that there's a real switch, if you will, from no escape to this last part of the sentence.
Which is being separated from my dad?
Yes.
Does that sound evasive to you?
Yes, it does.
Is it similar to what happened in the previous page when he started to talk about him and Erik getting together and then he changed the subject?
Yes. So you now have 2 examples, yes.
Is this something that patients do? I think you've already said patients don't just come in and start, ripping open their heart, laying all the painful stuff on the table.
Yes.
Is it typical in the course of therapy that a patient may start to talk about something sensitive that they don't want to tell you?
Yes.
And then they'll just shift gears in the middle, and when you put the 2 pieces together, it's sort of nonsense?
Yes, and you almost can see them censoring what they're going to say. So that's a very critical time to try to pick up, because it's pretty obvious a lot of times.
Okay. And actually here, Dr. Oziel says something which we weren't able to hear on the tape, but then Lyle just continues talking about his mother and how bad things were for her at this time when she moved from Princeton to California.
Yes.
The old news.
The old news, yes.
And again, with this, when Lyle Menendez is talking about all this bad stuff that was going on in 1986, 1987, does Dr. Oziel say, wait a minute, that's old business. What was happening in 1989?
No, he does not.
He just sort of goes along with the flow of this conversation.
Yes, he does.
And that conversation about leaving New Jersey and how badly she felt and all the changes goes on for several pages until page 24, correct?
Yes.
Now, on page 24, you recall there's this large statement by Lyle Menendez starting at line 8 through line 24 where he is talking about this. He's talking about the fact that, at least from his perspective, the fact that his mother does not seem to know how much money his father is making, how much money is available to her in the family.
Yes.
And that's what he's talking about, how amazing it is that Mom doesn't know and how he had conversations with her about it.
Yes.
Does Dr. Oziel follow up on this, or does he change the subject?
He changes the subject.
And in changing the subject, does he use a word that he uses very, very frequently in this tape?
Yes, he does.
And what is the word that he uses here when he changes the subject?
He uses the word control.
Now, starting at page 24, line 25, when Dr. Oziel changes the subject to the father totally controlling the mother,
Yes.
through the next 3 pages to page 27, did I ask you, Dr. Burgess, to count how many times over those little less than 2.5 pages Dr. Oziel uses some form of the word control?
Yes, you did.
And how many times did he, well, first of all, did he use the word control or controlled or controlling in every single speech he makes
Yes.
between 24 and 27?
Objection, made against the speech.
All right, we're referring to each separate segment here that's identified on the transcript?
Exactly, Your Honor. Each segment were preceded by his initials.
Yes.
And when you add up how many times he used some form of the word control in each and every time he spoke on those pages, how many times did he use the word?
I counted 13 times.
And did either Erik or Lyle Menendez, over the same course of time in their remarks, did either one of them ever use the word control here?
No, they did not.
Now, in going through this, on the bottom of page 24, this is where Dr. Oziel changes the subject and talks about the father controlling the mother,
Yes.
and talking about he keeps control over her by not letting her know about the money, basically.
Yes.
Okay? And all Lyle does is he continues talking about the discussion he had with his mother.
That's correct.
And now, when Lyle finishes talking about, on page 25, line 16, the discussion he had with his mother about her ignorance of the finances, which he's apparently bringing her up to date on, Dr. Oziel agrees with Lyle, and then does he change the subject again?
No, he doesn't change the subject.
Well, does he then shift it to characterizing the father?
Yes, he does.
He says there's another part. You see that where Dr. Oziel says, you say that, when you say that, I think you're right. And then he says, but there's another part of it, which is, to shorten it, your father was a totally controlling man.
Yes.
Now, that's a different subject matter than what Lyle Menendez has been talking about, isn't
Yes,
it?
it is.
And then Dr. Oziel goes on, starting at line 22, to do what?
He now goes into using the, talking about the father needing to have the mother completely subservient. And he uses much of the language he's used before in terms of the shell of a person and how to control someone, and how he can get someone totally under his control, which brings us up to line 15 on 26.
Okay.
That the way he keeps somebody under control is not to let them have any money.
Okay, so this whole speech that ends with the end of side one has to do with him talking to them about all the ways in which their father controlled their mother.
Yes.
He uses control in that little speech alone,
Yes.
starting on 25, line 22, 4 times.
Yes.
Then the tape shifts over.
Yes.
And when the tape shifts over, does he change the subject?
No, he doesn't.
Well,
He changes the subject to go to, he tries to draw Erik in.
let's look at 26, line 24. Before the tape turns over, you've just said Dr. Oziel's talking about how the father controls the mother.
Yes.
His opening line on the second side is to just completely control you.
Yes.
So now he's shifting to the control of the children,
Yes.
which has nothing whatsoever to do with what Lyle Menendez said that prompted this speech, does it?
No.
Sustain the answer, sir.
And does he then continue with this particular theme that the father controlled the sons up to line 12 of page 27?
Yes.
And in this speech, where he's talking about the father controlling the sons, which begins at line 24 on page 26, does he use the word control 6 times?
Yes.
And at the end of that speech, what does he do? Starting with line 10.
Okay, with line 10, he now wants to, he switches to Erik. He switches the questioning to Erik. What do you think, Erik? How about it? And saying we haven't said a lot.
And in fact, that's true. Erik's been pretty silent
Yes,
at this
that's
point.
true.
So it appears that he's trying to get Erik to talk
Yes.
on the tape.
Yes.
And after 13 repetitions of the word control in the preceding few minutes, what is Erik's response when Dr. Oziel tries to get him to say things on this tape?
Erik?
Call for conclusion on part of the witness.
All right, you have tied different things together, so
Okay.
raise a question.
What is Erik's response after this speech by Dr. Oziel in which he mentions control 13 times?
Erik's response is to say he rejects it. He doesn't like hearing it.
Okay, and he says that 3 times.
3
doesn't he?
times, yes.
And he says he doesn't like hearing these things.
That's right.
Which are negative things that Dr. Oziel's been saying, are they not?
Yes, about his father.
About my father.
Yes.
And Menendez then agrees.
Yes, he
True.
does.
He doesn't like hearing it either.
That's right.
And does this, as a therapist, if you were in session with these 2 young men, does this sound like they hated their father?
No, it does not.
Does it sound like their state of mind with respect to the father is that he controlled them?
No, it does not.
And following along here, does Dr. Oziel do something appropriate at line 19 of page 27?
Yes, he does.
Is this the kind of question that is supposed to happen throughout the course of a therapy session?
Yes, he goes for the feeling. Yes.
And he asks Erik what he's feeling.
Yes.
And Erik says upset.
Yes, he does.
And when you listen to the tape, does he sound upset?
Yes, he does.
And then does Erik proceed to explain why he is upset?
Yes, he does.
And does he explain he's upset because he killed two people that he loved?
Yes, he does.
Objection, calls for conclusion on part of the witness, speaks for herself.
Sustained.
Now, when Erik says that his father and his mother were two people that I loved, and I just don't want to hear anything about them, it doesn't matter what they were, okay?
Yes.
Does Dr. Oziel pick up on that? Well, wait a minute, if you love them, why'd you kill them?
No, he does not.
And farther on in this statement by Erik Menendez, starting at line 27, when he said, I'll read the whole sentence, it starts on 26. They were very apparent in my mind before this, led up to the fact where I had no other choice.
Objection to the form of the question is argumentative.
I haven't finished the question.
Objection to emphasis.
All right, you're asking the witness to read line 26 and the full sentence, is that right?
I wanted to just
Page
read
27.
27, I wanted to read 28.
Okay, the witness can read it to herself.
Okay. Read the two sentences where Erik
Done that?
mentions he
Okay,
has
she's
no
done
choice.
that. You may ask your question.
Now, do you consider it significant that in a therapy session where a patient has said or agreed that a mother was killed in some form of mercy killing, if one of those patients then says this killing was because he had no choice, would you consider that a significant thing to follow up on?
Yes, I would.
Is having no choice consistent with a mercy killing?
No, it is not.
And again on page 28, looking at line 4, does Erik again repeat that he had no choice at the time,
Yes, he does.
but he regrets it now?
Yes, he does.
Now, does Dr. Oziel try to explore this cognitive dissonance by asking, wait a minute, what do you mean you had no choice? I thought this was a mercy killing.
No, he does not.
Does he ask anything at all about what Erik is saying?
No, he does not.
And do you note on line 13 of page 28, Erik again repeats that he doesn't like hearing his father put in this sort of way,
Yes, he does say that.
meaning a negative way.
It's a negative, right?
And is that cognitively dissonant with the notion that that same person would himself describe his father in a negative way?
Yes.
And do you see anywhere in this transcript where Erik Menendez describes his father in a negative way?
No, I do not.
And again on line 19, do you see Erik talking about his father as someone he loved and had no choice to do what he did?
I see that, yes.
Now, is it in the course of this therapy session, has the theme emerged prior to this point that the father was killed because of what he was doing to the mother?
Yes.
And is that cognitively dissonant with having no choice but to kill him?
It is.
Is it cognitively dissonant with the notion of no escape?
No, it's not.
Is it cognitively dissonant with the notion of a dangerous situation, which Lyle Menendez refers to at one point?
No, it is not.
Now, here, Erik also says he hates himself for doing it.
Yes.
And when he says that, is the affect consistent with what he's saying?
Yes, it is.
And did you note at that point in the tape specifically that he was crying more loudly than any other point?
Yes, he was.
And do you see on line 23 that Erik makes reference to a misconception of the family
Yes, I see that.
and the fact that no one understood?
Yes.
And does Dr. Oziel follow up on those two notions, that there's something misconceived or misperceived about this family?
He does not.
And if you were in therapy with two children of a family who had killed their parents, would you explore this?
Yes.
Is this, like the basic training, some intimation of abuse?
Yes, it certainly is.
And again, on page 29, does Erik talk about loving his father on line 4?
Yes, he does.
And does he also say on line 7 that he hated his father for what he did to his mother?
Yes.
But does he say he loved him again?
Yes, he does say that.
And then he talks of, does he not, something that was way beyond control. This is page 19, line 9.
Yes.
Is something way beyond control cognitively dissonant with a mercy killing on the one hand and a killing of the father to stop him from abusing the mother that you're killing?
Yes, it is.
Is it cognitively dissonant with the notion of self-defense?
No, it is not.
And do you see Dr. Oziel asks the question, what was beyond control?
Yes, I see that.
That's an appropriate question.
Yes, it is.
Does he give them a chance to answer it?
No.
Does he provide his own answer?
He provides his own answer.
And the answer he provides was that you had to kill him?
Yes.
Does that make any sense?
No, it doesn't.
And on the next line, when Erik says, eventually it had to happen, it was basically ruining my life, and I guess Lyle's.
Yes.
Are those significant statements?
Yes, they are.
Is eventually it had to happen cognitively dissonant with a mercy killing?
Yes, it is.
Is it was basically ruining my life cognitively dissonant with the notion that all that was wrong in this family was the way the father treated the mother?
Yes.
Improper opinion.
Overall, you can answer the question.
Yes, it was.
Does Dr. Oziel ever follow up on those two areas of cognitive dissonance?
No, he does not.
And on line, if you were the therapist and you had heard everything that precedes this, and Erik Menendez said it was basically ruining my life, what's the question that you would have asked?
The question right there is to get at what was ruining the life and try to explore this.
What is it he's talking about?
What's he talking about?
Now, being molested can ruin your life, can it not?
Yes, it can.
Line 15 of page 29, do you see Erik saying, I know that she loved me somehow, with reference to his mother?
Yes.
And does Dr. Oziel actually pick up on that somehow?
No.
Well,
He interrupts.
okay, he says, I know that she loved me somehow, and then Dr. Oziel says, couldn't ever tell you or show you?
Yes.
That the mother couldn't tell him or show him how she loved him.
Yes.
Okay? Maybe I'm wrong. I interpret that as picking up on the somehow. Am I being too generous here?
Objection argumentative.
Rephrase the question.
Okay. If a child says, I know my mommy loves me somehow, does that suggest to you that the child is wishful thinking, that the mother isn't showing it or saying it if the child uses the word somehow rather than because she hugs me, because she tells me, because she does things for me?
Yes.
Okay. And now, do you see Dr. Oziel doing something starting on line 19 of page 29 that's inappropriate?
Yes.
And what is he doing there?
He now brings in the mother's conversation. He says, I remember when your mom called, so that he's interjecting information that comes from other sources.
And is he
And
changing
changes the subject.
And what subject does he change it to?
He now changes to the issue of disinheritance.
So he's floating disinheritance past them again, is that
Yes.
correct? And does Erik agree with him? Oh, yes, disinheriting was a critical factor?
No, he doesn't.
Does he in fact ignore what...
He just ignores him.
And stays with what theme?
He stays with the issue of his mother, wishing he had the extremely close relationship so he could tell her everything that ever happened.
And if in this context of two children of a family who had killed their parents and you're supposedly in a therapy session and one of them tells you, I wish I could have told my mother everything that ever happened,
Yes.
is that something you'd follow up on?
Yes.
Would you ask, what is it you couldn't tell your mother?
Yes, you try to get at that information that he would want to have told her.
And does Dr. Oziel try to do that? What was the secrets you were keeping from your mother?
No, he doesn't.
And when Erik Menendez says in the course of the same explanation on page 30, starting at the end of line 9 and going to 10, when he says, I was raised that I couldn't tell her.
Yes.
Now you have a son telling you, a therapist, that he was raised in such a way that he couldn't tell his mother things.
Yes.
Would you explore that? Why couldn't you tell her?
Yes, you would.
And when Erik Menendez says on line 14 that he was never given a chance to get close to either of them, that from a very early age he was taught he couldn't get close to them,
Yes?
Is that a strong indication of some kind of psychological abuse?
Yes.
Does Dr. Oziel ask the kinds of questions that a therapist who's exploring child abuse would be expected to ask?
No, he does not.
All he does is confirm that the family way was to not talk about feelings,
Yes. He
but
can-
not find out what it was that was going on that kept people separated?
Right.
Now, do you see Dr. Oziel asking on line 21, did you ever try to tell your mother or talk with your mother about what your dad was doing?
Yes, I see that.
And Erik's response was, no way, I couldn't face that.
Yes.
Now, he goes on in this paragraph to allude to the fact that he couldn't face talking to his mother about what his father was doing to his mother. He wraps it back into that all the problems were mom's problems.
Yes.
Okay. But is there something about the particular strength of his answer that to you as a therapist would have been a very strong clue?
Yes.
And a very strong clue to the existence of problems between him and the father?
Yes.
A strong clue that it's what his dad was doing to him that he couldn't tell his mother?
Yes.
Yes, the last questions were leading.
Yes, they were, Your Honor, but it is.
Objection is sustained. The answer is stricken.
Okay. And I shall ask it non-leading. What would the strong reaction of Erik Menendez suggest to you?
He starts right out saying he can't face that and left that up to my brother. That is one area to start right there. What was left up to the brother?
Okay.
So that's one area. What couldn't he face? And you can almost take each line and further explore it. He just does not do that. I would have to leave. What does that mean? That comes down to line 27. There are a lot of just small phrases that could be picked up on.
With respect to, though, the fact that all of this follows a question by Oziel, did you ever try to tell your mom, not ask, or talk with your mom about what your dad was doing? Does his strong reaction tell you something about what he's interpreting that question to mean?
Sustained.
When he says, no way, I couldn't face that, is that cognitively dissonant with the notion that what he couldn't face was talking to his mother about what his father was doing to his mother?
Sustained.
Does that make sense to you in a psychological way as a reaction to the question about talking to his mother about what his father was doing to his mother?
Sustained.
Dr. Burgess, is it your opinion that in this particular phrase, no way, I couldn't face that, I left that up to my brother, Erik is talking about something other than what his father is doing to his mother?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Well, this isn't her expert opinion interpreting this.
All right. Is she basing it solely upon these words in this transcript?
Solely upon the way he...
Never answer it then
Okay.
in that fashion.
They solely upon the way he responds.
I mean, the tone of voice or the words
Tone of
used?
voice, the strength of the words that he uses in response to what Dr. Oziel says about, did you ever try to tell your mom or talk with your mom about what your dad was doing?
And
Okay?
based solely upon the content of this transcript, you're asking, does she have an opinion?
Yes. Upon that, do you have an opinion about whether Erik Menendez is actually answering that with respect to what his father's doing to his mother?
Yes? I
Okay.
know. Yes.
What's your opinion?
My opinion is that is not what he is referring to.
What, in your opinion, is he referring to?
He's referring to a current situation, not an old situation.
The current situation as of August 20th, 1989.
Back.
Objection, move to strike the speculation part of the witness.
Which answer? Which question?
I'm sorry, the last answer and the question that she's answered right now.
So you're objecting to the
I'm sorry,
question
yeah.
before this last one?
Yes, I'm sorry,
And the answer.
Speculation.
All right, the objection is sustained to the last question, and that answer will be stricken. The other answer's already been given. There's no objection to the stand.
Now, do you see on page 31, Erik this is still Erik talking. And do you see him talking about how he was, starting on line 6, he was taught to love his father, and he wanted to love his father.
Yes?
And is there any follow-up by Dr. Oziel of these feelings of love as he's expressing them here?
No?
And now when he talks about facing the fact that his mother had to be killed, it was the only way out for her.
Yes?
Is there any follow-up of that by Dr. Oziel?
No.
And does it appear that at this point, after I don't know how many minutes, that Erik is agreeing with the theory that Oziel started out with in the beginning about mercy killing?
Objection, proper opinion.
Sustained.
Is there any explanation up until this point, well, is there any explanation both up until this point and after about why this was the only way out for the mother, apart from the mercy killing theme that's been played out by Lyle, Menendez, and by Dr. Oziel?
Objection calls for conclusion on the part of the witness.
Sustained.
Did you find in this transcript any other explanation by Erik Menendez, by Lyle Menendez, by Dr. Oziel, of why the mother was killed apart from the mercy killing.
Objection, cross-check completed.
Sustained. The transcript speaks for itself.
Okay. Would you point out to me, Dr. Burgess, any place in the transcript where a different theory of the killing of the mother besides mercy killing occurred?
Same objection.
Sustained. Let's move on.
Now, at the bottom of page 31, starting at line 21, do you see the point where Erik Menendez starts describing a dream he had?
Yes, I do.
And what is the significance to you as a therapist of this particular dream?
This dream is expressing a suicide wish.
And in this particular therapy session, does Dr. Oziel ever treat Erik's suicide potential?
Objection, lack of foundation.
Well, based on what's on the tape, we don't know what's...
I mean, what was discussed here, whether it was addressed by Dr. Oziel and the
Yes, whether
responses?
anything that's happening here is the appropriate therapeutic response to a patient who's talking about suicidal ideation.
No, I don't see him addressing that.
And you also see on page 32, line 10, Erik talking about how hard it is for him that no one knows the truth, and they can't relate to him or what he's going through because they don't know that he killed his parents.
That's right.
And is that... as a therapist, if a patient expresses this kind of feeling, does that tell you something about their desire to confess?
Yes.
When you talked before about the fact that the appropriate goal of a therapist who had two patients before you in the situation, if you will, of these two young men, was to try to get them in a place where they could go to the authorities and say what they had done, were you taking into consideration this apparent desire on the part of Erik Menendez to confess?
Yes, I was.
And again, here on page 32, starting at line 15, there's a speech by Dr. Oziel. Does this seem to be like an apologia, like an acceptance or a support for the homicides?
Objection, cross-check completed.
Sustained.
Does he appear here to be, well, what is he doing here?
Well, he's interjecting his own ideas. He gives these are his own ideas. He's suggested he doesn't follow up on something that's absolutely critical. The word truth is just mentioned 2 lines above. So he just, again, rejects anything that's being said by either brother.
Give us the citation to where the word truth is.
Line 11.
Where Erik talks about that everyone now, they don't know the truth.
Truth, yes.
This
What
has
truth?
to
Yes.
do with his desire to confess.
Truth is a very good word to explore.
When a patient says nobody knows the truth, what's the therapist supposed to ask?
Get at what the truth they're talking about. Get
What's-
that to be explored.
What's the truth?
What's the truth, right?
Oziel doesn't ask what the truth is. No, he doesn't. And again, starting at line 27 on page 32, does Dr. Oziel do something here that he has done before that's inappropriate in this session?
Yes, he uses that technique again where he gets into trying to get some feeling, stimulate some feelings, some hostility, the blaming.
Feelings and hostility by whom towards whom?
He's trying to evoke that in the brothers.
Towards whom?
This one is for the father, I think.
No, I think it's,
For the mother?
yeah, for the mother. If you read it, that you were blamed.
Oh, her, yes, at the bottom. He switches, I think, over to yes, on the bottom on page 28, line 28.
Yeah,
Here
starting
you're
at line
loving her,
20, he's
trying-
talking.
careful her.
This appears to be similar to what he did earlier, trying to get them to say something hostile about their mother.
Yes.
Now, turning to page 34, again, looking for clues or things that should have been followed up. And this is where Erik Menendez is talking about, first of all, what his expectations were about what his life was going to be like in college,
Yes.
if his parents were alive. And then he mentioned, starting on line 7, that he and Lyle definitely had different kind of relationship with our parents.
Yes.
And they had different ways of dealing with them, dealt with the parents differently.
Yes.
And then Erik says, like I got scared.
Yes.
Now, would you consider that significant?
Yes, that's a feeling that certainly would want to be explored.
And significant for him in talking about his relationship with his parents to talk about being scared?
Yes, that's a new word introduced.
And is that cognitively dissonant from the notion of a mercy killing?
Yes.
And then does he go on to talk about his concerns about Lyle and that Lyle might commit suicide?
Yes, he does.
And is this the point when Dr. Oziel starts this touchy-feely part of the session,
Objection on the matter.
Overall.
Yes, it is.
trying to get them to look at each other?
Yes, face each other, yes.
And what is, you've indicated before the jury heard, before the blue jury heard this tape, that this was highly inappropriate and manipulative in this session.
Yes.
And you note that even at the very beginning of this, on the bottom of page 34, line 26, he's saying, Erik, no, come on, look at him, tell your brother.
Yes.
And from that, do you assume that Erik is not cooperating?
Yes.
Objection calls for speculation.
Right, as to the form of the question, objection sustained.
What do you infer from Dr. Oziel saying, Erik, no, come on, look at him, tell your brother?
That he's not looking at him.
Okay. And then do you see Dr. Oziel saying on page 35, line 3, again, no, got to be tough and strong.
Yes.
And is that appropriate?
No, that's not appropriate.
Why not?
Because you're going against what the patient is trying to tell you. You're forcing. It's a forced situation. You have somebody protesting.
Is it particularly inappropriate or more inappropriate when previous in this session, both of these patients have been talking about very serious matters and talking about emotions?
Yes.
And one of them has been crying for about 10 minutes.
Yes.
Is it inappropriate to try to force a patient to do things they're not emotionally ready to do?
Yes, it certainly is.
Does this, and in fact, if you note even at this point when Dr. Oziel is doing this, Erik is crying.
Erik is crying, yes.
Is it appropriate to do this kind of confrontational therapy with a visibly upset patient?
No, it is not.
What do you make, Dr. Burgess, of Dr. Oziel's statement on line 15, page 35, apparently directed at Lyle Menendez? I know you stepped in and sort of saved him. Do you have any idea what he's talking about?
No, I don't.
Does that fit with anything that's been said on this tape?
No, it doesn't. Not coming from Dr. Oziel.
Now, turning to page 36, are we still at this section where Erik is crying and Dr. Oziel is trying to get them to do this thing he wants them to do?
Yes.
Now, turning your attention to line 8 of page 36, you see that he's addressing this to Erik Menendez,
Yes.
and you see that he starts to say, you told me that between the two of you?
Yes.
And a little later on in the session, does it become clear that this conversation he's referring to between him and Erik happened in confidence,
Yes, it did.
in a session?
Yes.
So is it appropriate? What is Dr. Oziel doing here?
He's breaching confidentiality.
And is this the only time on this tape where he ignores confidentiality?
Noted.
Cause for conclusion.
Sustained, the answer stricken.
Which one? No, it isn't?
I'm sorry?
Is it the no, it isn't answer that was stricken? The last answer?
The answer is stricken. The objection is sustained to the question. The answer.
Just for a moment to jump ahead to page 39, line 24. Do you see Dr. Oziel saying, and I know how much Erik loves you because when you were not here, meaning Lyle was not here, it's okay if I tell him, Erik, is it all right? And with no answer. He told me...
Objection misstates the tape.
All right, regardless of that, you're directing the witness's attention to lines 25 and 26 and 27 of page 39. You see those?
Exactly.
Yes, I do.
Okay, she's read them, and the question.
All right. Is that a breach of confidentiality by Dr. Oziel?
Yes.
Objection calls for speculation on the part of the witness.
All right, rephrase the question. Does it appear to be?
Does it appear to be, and in your opinion, was it?
Objection, improper opinion, lack of foundation.
Overall.
Yes.
Why is it a breach of confidentiality?
He states it in a positive, and he doesn't get a clear statement from Erik, who he's asking, but he just goes ahead and says it.
And what is he saying? I mean, why is this thing, how do you know this is a breach of confidentiality?
Because he says, because when you're not here.
So it appears that he's telling Lyle something Erik said to him alone.
Yes, he's taking it from another time.
If a person has more than one patient in therapy who are related to each other and who may have issues, therapeutic and psychological issues between them,
Yes.
is that a dual relationship?
Yes.
Are dual relationships to be avoided?
Yes, they are.
And is one of the problems with dual relationships just this kind of thing, breaches of confidentiality?
Yes.
Now, that is another kind of dual relationship than the kind of dual relationship when a patient gets involved in business and other relationships with patients.
Yes.
But that's also a dual relationship.
Yes.
Okay, so we were back at the first breach of confidentiality that appears here on page 36, line 8.
Yes.
Okay, now, moving down to line 14, do you see Lyle Menendez saying the whole family worked behind closed doors?
Yes.
Is that a significant statement, given the circumstances under which these young men are before Dr. Oziel?
Yes.
Does he follow up on it?
No, he doesn't.
Now, do you see something else here inappropriate that Dr. Oziel is doing on line 21?
Yes.
And what's he doing there?
He's really pitting Lyle against Erik when he says, remember how hurt you were when Erik told me what happened. And I remember the hurt and pain they didn't talk with you about it first.
Yes, you notice he doesn't say, I remember how angry you were, or I remember how you threatened me. Do you notice that that's missing?
Objection, I remember.
Sustained.
Do you know what Dr. Oziel is referring to here?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Are you aware that there was a session with Erik Menendez on October 31st when he told Dr. Oziel he was involved in the killing of his parents?
Yes.
Do you recall that Lyle Menendez was, at Dr. Oziel's insistence, invited to come over?
Objection, misstates the testimony.
Sustained.
Do you recall that Lyle Menendez was called and Dr. Oziel talked to him, and following that, Lyle Menendez went to Dr. Oziel's office?
Yes.
And do you recall that Lyle Menendez was described by Dr. Oziel as having a very dramatic reaction to learning that his brother had talked about the killing of the parents?
Yes.
Your Honor, I would object to this as going beyond the scope.
All right, it's going beyond the content of this, so let's get back to
Okay.
what it is that you're asking.
When you read this section, okay, remember how hurt you were when Erik told me what happened, and I remember the hurt and the pain. You felt really violated. It was real painful for you, okay?
Yes.
Did you, based on the information from the testimony in this case that you were exposed to, relate that to the October 31st session?
Yes.
Now, do you see that farther down on page 36, line 27, Lyle Menendez refers to the tragedy of the family?
Yes.
Is that a significant phrase for you, given the circumstances under which these young men are with Dr. Oziel?
Yes. Yes.
Does Dr. Oziel follow up on that?
No, he doesn't.
Now, turning to page 38. Are we still in the place where Dr. Oziel is encouraging this confrontational therapy, if you will?
Yes.
And is this where he's laughing at the brothers?
Yes, line 21.
And, rude language aside, do you see that Lyle Menendez says, we hate that hugging shit, by the way, we fucking hate that?
Yes.
Is that significant to you that Lyle Menendez is talking about this hatred for this physical contact with a brother that he's already told Dr. Oziel he loves very much?
Yes.
What's the significance of that to you?
There's several significances, but one that it certainly speaks to the touching, the having contact, and that's something that he is saying that he doesn't want.
And why is that significant?
Well, that should be followed up, but what it really means is that there are persons, especially untreated, abused children, don't like to be touched.
That's typical?
One example, yes.
And does Dr. Oziel follow up?
No, he doesn't follow up.
Does he do something inappropriate?
Yes, he does.
What does he do?
He quite clearly says, you know what, I don't care. He negates the protest, the strong protest that Lyle has given to this particular technique.
And he's saying, when he says, I don't care, he's saying, I don't care how you feel, isn't he?
That's right.
Now, you listened 5-6 times to this tape. You listened to Dr. Oziel's voice on this tape.
Yes.
You listened to the tone of voice he used with the Menendez brothers.
Yes.
And he got real quiet and real gentle at some points.
Yes, he did.
And the way he talks to them on this tape.
Yes.
Did you also read the transcripts of the so-called notes that he dictated of October 31st and November 2nd?
Yes.
Does he talk about them there in these same touchy-feely tones as he uses in this tape?
Pardon me, that's argumentative.
Sustained.
Does he talk about them there in a similar way as what he does in this tape-recorded session?
Objection, irrelevant.
Sustained.
Do you see a difference in the kind of language Dr. Oziel uses about and with the Menendez brothers during this versus what he dictates behind their back?
Objection, irrelevant and argumentative.
Sustained.
Is it sadistic for a therapist in dealing with people who have been discussing very serious and traumatic matters, one of whom has been crying, the other of whom has been talking about emotion? Is it sadistic to say, I don't care how you feel?
Objection and proper opinion. Party minute.
Overrule.
Yes.
Your Honor, may we approach vis-a-vis scheduling?
How much longer is your direct examination going to be of this witness?
That's what I wanted to approach to discuss with you.
Well, just give me a clue as to how long you think it'll be.
Okay, well, it depends on whether I'm as tired as I am now. Tired as I am now, it takes longer than not tired, in all honesty. So if we break and I have till the next session, I will probably finish with her fairly quickly
How long is
in front of
quickly?
both juries.
You did tell me you had about
That-
45 minutes to go when we resumed, so that would have been about 4:15 or so.
Not
So,
bad,
yeah.
not bad.
We're still going, so how much longer do you think it'll be?
Probably joint before both juries, about 10 minutes, and then about 15 minutes in front of just the blue folk.
Regard to why the killings were committed?
No.
Why?
Well, as I said, given the context of this inappropriate therapeutic relationship, given the fact that this is a reenactment or a replaying of something that was discussed in a session on November 2nd, in which Dr. Oziel's theory was explained to the brothers. Given that this is a small portion of a session that was multiple hours long and we don't know what preceded it, given the inconsistencies within it, I don't put much faith in it.
Does it impact your opinion at all, the fact that this session was something that was done at Dr. Oziel's request or direction?
Objection. It seems that's not evidence.
Sustained.
Did you discuss with Lyle Menendez how it was that this session came about?
I did.
And is there anything about that information that affects your opinion?
Yes.
And what is that?
Was my
Pause for hearsay.
Sustained.
Is it your opinion that the circumstances under which this session took place affects its reliability?
yes.
And do you feel that the circumstances under which it took place made it reliable or unreliable?
Highly unreliable.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor.
Dr. Conte, when did you arrive in town?
Yesterday morning.
And did you talk to Lyle Menendez about this tape recording once you got back into town?
Yes.
Is there a reason you didn't discuss this tape recording when you were last in front of this jury?
I'm going to object, Your Honor.
Sustained. Let me ask if we can have one of the bailiffs go in and just quiet them down a little bit in the jury room. It's a little distracting for the jurors in the jury box.
Shall I continue? Dr. Conte, I believe you indicated the last time that you were here that you were not really interested in Dr. Oziel's notes or anything else. Is that correct?
I don't recall saying that.
Well, did you consider Dr. Oziel's notes the last time you came in and testified in front of this jury?
I consider Dr. Oziel's testimony. Yes, I don't recall reviewing notes.
Right, and at the time that you last testified, were you aware of this tape?
I'm going to object, Your Honor.
Were you aware of the existence of this tape the last time you testified?
Yes.
And so you now are telling us that in spite of the existence of this tape, that there's nothing on there that makes you feel that you need to amend your prior opinion as to why this crime was committed. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I believe at one point in this particular session, now you do agree, do you not, that that is in fact Lyle Menendez's voice on the tape and on the transcript where it says LM for Lyle Menendez?
Yes.
And you've spoken with Erik Menendez as well?
Yes.
And you have no reason to believe that that is not Erik Menendez's voice on the tape either, do you?
No.
And do you have any reason to believe that this tape has been tampered with in any way, that it's been doctored or somehow interfered with?
I have no reason to believe that the tape has been doctored with, no.
All right, so there's no reason for you to believe that the information coming from the defendant's mouths was said by someone else and then made up or something like that? In other
Well,
words,
I have reason to believe it was made up by someone else. I don't think the words came from someone else. I think as I testified, my understanding is that this is a replaying of material that was developed on November 2nd, some weeks before, and that this was made some hours after Dr. Oziel and the brothers were together.
were you aware of the fact that Lyle Menendez saw Dr. Oziel on the 8th and the 9th of December?
I don't recall.
May I approach, please, with Exhibit 97?
Yes.
Showing you an exhibit that's been marked as Exhibit 97, it appears to be some billing records. I don't know if you're familiar with these records, Dr. Conte.
No, I've not seen these.
All right. To explain them then, it appears that they're from 1989, and the first page you're looking at appears to be January 17th, and there's an L there. There's been testimony that the L stands for Lyle and the E on this stands for Erik, and I'm going to show you the second page, or the other side of the first page, where there appears to be, this is 1988, I'm sorry, 1989, an entry for 12/8/89, L, 1.5 sessions, and then 12/9, L, 2.5. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I believe you indicated in your direct examination that it was your opinion that Lyle Menendez had not seen Dr. Oziel since November the 2nd. Is that correct?
Yes.
And would that billing sheet that I just showed you change your opinion in any respect?
Well, you just showed me dates that came after, I believe, isn't it?
No, this particular tape, and I think it was your testimony when Ms. Lansing asked you the question, this tape was made on the 11th of December of 1989, and the billing seems to indicate that on the 8th and 9th, which would be 3 and 2 days before December 11th, Lyle Menendez...
I got you. I'm with you.
Do you see my question now?
Yes.
All right, with that, did you discuss that fact with Lyle Menendez?
Not specifically. I did know that Dr. Oziel had a tendency to bill for sessions that weren't kept.
If somebody canceled?
Yes.
Okay, well, if you look at those records, you'll see many times there's a notation where it says no show, where the patient has not arrived. Do you see anything that looks like no show or no session next to the entries for the 8th and the 9th of December of 1989?
No, I don't.
How many hours would you say you spent talking to Lyle Menendez about this tape yesterday?
4, perhaps.
Did you actually have the copy of the tape in your possession when you
Yes.
spoke to him? And did you go over the tape with him?
I didn't go over line by line.
Did you have a copy of the transcript with you?
Yes.
Now, I believe you indicated that this was not, in your opinion, a therapy session. Is that correct?
Correct.
At page, you now have a copy of the transcript that we all have, page 34. Would you please refer to that page?
Sure.
Your Honor, some but not all of the jurors have the transcript. Some of them have placed it. Does the court wish them to have the transcript while I question?
I don't know what you're going to be doing.
I'm going to be going through the transcript now with Dr. Conti. Different pages and different
All right,
lines.
if you have those there, then you can look at them.
Dr. Conti, do you have page 34 there in front of you of the transcript which was provided to everyone today?
Yes.
And you see there down at line 22, starting with the initials J-O, and thereon begins a colloquy between the participants and Dr. Oziel, where they're talking about whether or not Lyle had ever been told by his brother Erik before that Erik loved him. Do you remember that portion of the transcript?
We have one here that doesn't have it. No, we have two then. We have two people that don't have them, so let's see if we get a couple more transcripts. Do we have any extras, or is that it? I don't think we have any.
Those aren't the right ones.
All right. All right, then maybe you just have to share.
Well, I have, there's one more. Here.
All right, well, you can share. You can just look over someone's shoulder there and look. That'll be fine.
Dr. Conti, starting at page 34 and continuing on for quite a few pages, I think until page 39, there's a portion in there where Dr. Oziel is trying to get the two brothers to talk about their feelings for each other. Are you familiar with that particular portion of this session?
I am.
Would you consider that to be non-therapeutic?
Yes.
Why?
Well, it's highly manipulative. It's confrontive. It's pushing two clients to do something that they clearly aren't ready to do, and there's no indication that the session prepared them for that kind of highly manipulative interaction.
Yeah, well, you don't know what went on in the sessions before between Dr. Oziel and the defendants, do you?
No, that's the whole problem.
Well, you haven't made any effort to find out, have you?
He's vague. He's testified.
All right, why don't you rephrase the
Time
question?
before the tape, I'm not sure what
Okay.
you're talking about.
Dr. Connie, you've just said that you feel that this is manipulative because these particular patients were not ready at this point to make this kind of a declaration of love for each other, something to that effect. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Are you familiar with what occurred in all of the prior sessions between the times that the defendants killed their parents in December the 11th of 1989?
I am aware of what Lyle told me, the person I was evaluating, took place.
During all those sessions?
Yeah, I didn't go through line by line, but I'm aware of the general gist of what took place.
Okay. And you were not aware until today that he had therapy sessions with Dr. Oziel on the 8th and 9th of December, correct?
I don't know that he had therapy sessions on the 8th. I know that he was billed for them.
So you never discussed, so did you discuss with him the stage at which his relationship with his brother was on December the 11th of 1989?
No, not specifically.
And yet it's still your opinion that you consider it very manipulative of Dr. Oziel to get these two brothers to tell each other that they loved each other.
Well, there's no foundation here that he's done that work. Now, you know, maybe in all the hours before, when he was building up to this one little segment of tape, maybe he was doing great therapy, but it certainly isn't indicated in the prior pages of this therapy session.
All right, so you find fault even with this particular portion of the tape, is that correct? Pages 34 through 39, where Dr. Oziel is getting them to talk to each other about their feelings?
You asked me if it was therapy, and I said I didn't feel it was therapeutic.
Now, was there a reason that you did not ask to hear this tape prior to coming back into town this time?
I'm going to object, Your Honor.
You understand the question?
Maybe approach.
Okay, sure. All right, we're now ready to proceed. All right.
Dr. Conte, I'd like to refer you to page 19 of this particular document. Dr. Conte, you were asked on your direct examination about the Calabasas burglary, and you explained what your understanding of that burglary was. Do you recall your testimony in that regard this morning?
Yeah, I started to explain what I knew about it, I believe.
And did you mean to convey the impression that this was a childish prank?
No, absolutely not.
Were you aware of the amount of property that was taken in terms of the dollar amount in the second burglary in Calabasas in which Lyle Menendez participated?
I knew it was a lot. I don't recall the specific amount.
Did you know it was approximately $80,000 to $100,000 worth of goods?
I knew it was a lot, yes.
All right, and were you aware of the fact that Mr. Menendez made restitution to the families that were, the family that was aggrieved? The father had to pay back cash to compensate for the burglary. Were you aware of that?
I didn't recall that.
Your Honor, I'm going to object. I think that misstates the evidence.
All right, objection is overruled as far as the answer. He doesn't recall that, so that's the nature of the response.
In your discussions over the last several years with Lyle Menendez, did you ever discuss with him his participation in the burglary in Calabasas?
Yes.
And did you find it at all significant that he had participated in a burglary of this magnitude, and evaluating whether or not he committed a crime on August the 20th or whether or not he acted out of fear?
Well, yes, I consider it significant.
And
I think it's a serious act, and I think it reflects problems that should have been addressed earlier, significant problems.
so did you ever consider the fact that it showed that he might have some criminal propensities?
I did consider that.
Did you reject that notion?
I did.
Now, I believe you indicated in your examination, again on page 19, that I can't remember the word you used this morning, but something to the effect of about the father crying, and that you found some inconsistencies in the tape in terms of Lyle Menendez talking about his father crying.
Yes.
Now, if you look at line 4 of page 19, he clearly says, after the Calabasas...
I'm sorry, can I get to my original as well?
Yeah, I think the pages are way off, though.
I tried to do the best I could to reconcile them over the break.
What page?
Page 19, Your Honor, of the transcript we have. He's working from another transcript.
All right, what line?
Starting at line 4.
Do you have that here?
Yes, I got it. Thank you. I have it, Your Honor.
He has it.
Yes.
All right, it indicates here that after the Calabasas issue, he cried, and we were together, and we were close. That was the first time he ever cried in front of me. Do you see any ambiguity there in Lyle Menendez saying that that was the first time his father ever cried in front of him?
No, the ambiguity is a few lines later.
Okay, now let me. The question was just as to this line. Now we're going to go down to line 21. He again says at the end of line 21, he cried after the Calabasas issue, and after that, Erik and I were very sorry. Then on line 25, he says he cried. At line 26, he says, I thought he cried a lot after the Princeton issue. When he says, I thought he cried a lot after the Princeton issue, did you find that to be ambiguous?
Well, no, and that's not what I testified to.
Right. Well, it appears clearly from this transcript and the tape that Lyle Menendez said on several occasions at page 19 that his father cried.
Right, and then three lines later, he says, I cried, I never saw him.
And then he goes on.
May the witness
Yes.
finish?
I'm sorry, Your Honor.
Watch Fisher.
No, I don't believe I indicated that there were ambiguities within lines, but rather if you take the statement as a whole, he describes his father as crying, which is a behavior which is inconsistent with everything I've heard about his father, and then he himself takes it away after this long list of incidents that he talked about.
Okay, and then at line 28, he says, he would be very upset if I saw him crying or anything.
Right, men don't cry.
Right. Okay. Did you consider it possible that what Lyle Menendez was saying was true, that is, that his father actually cried over these incidents?
I did consider it, but it is so inconsistent with everything I know about his father, and he takes it back within the statement himself. Clients will often do that. They'll tell you a long string of things, and then they'll take it away at the very end. That's often the way people, when they're ambivalent about something. And I talked to Lyle about this, and he acknowledges that he often wished his father would cry.
So when you talked to Lyle Menendez yesterday at the county jail, he told you that his father hadn't cried. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so the several times it's mentioned on page 19 in his own voice on the tape, he is misspeaking. Would that be fair to say?
I don't know what the tone of the voice means.
Well, how would you explain that he says here?
I would explain that he was doing what he was told to do by Dr. Oziel, which was to use things that had happened in the past in constructing a tape that was consistent with Dr. Oziel's theory about what happened.
But if Dr. Oziel was telling him to take things from the past consistent with what had happened, he wasn't telling him to lie and make up things about his father crying, was he?
I don't think Dr. Oziel told him specifically to do that. No.
Where's the evidence that Dr. Oziel told him to say these things that weren't true? What evidence do you have that Dr. Oziel told Lyle Menendez to make things up that weren't true?
What Dr. Oziel did was to give him a theory on November 2nd.
Okay,
And they went over the theory, and Dr. Oziel gave to them and said, this is, and it must have been like, and presented to, and then Lyle complies with that in this.
So what was the theory that, in your opinion, Dr. Oziel gave Lyle Menendez? The theory of abuse as a cause of the murder?
No, I don't see that abuse was ever mentioned with Dr. Oziel.
Did you review his testimony, Dr. Conte?
Yes, I did.
And do you remember did you look at the notes that he made from the November 2nd session where he talked to Lyle Menendez about the abuse in the family constellation being useful later on if he were ever caught?
He was not talking about abuse. He was talking about, as I recall it, Dr. Oziel's testimony was talking about the way that Lyle's parents treated each other, and especially the way Dad treated in terms of controlling and manipulation and that kind of thing.
You also are aware of the fact that in the November 2nd session, Dr. Oziel talks about the father's domineering and controlling of the defendants,
Yes.
not the mother.
Yes.
Correct? Now, so you're saying then that Lyle Menendez was merely complying with the wish of Dr. Oziel to concoct this sort of family constellation. Is that correct?
I didn't say that. I'm
Well-
saying that
What are you saying?
I'm saying that I believe that this tape is largely, concoction is your word, but it is largely his compliance with Dr. Oziel's need to have something on tape which had his voice in which he's talking about the killing, and Dr. Oziel had given him a theory about why this happened.
Well, did you discuss with Lyle Menendez why he would do that for Dr. Oziel?
Yes.
And what did he tell you as to why he would comply with Dr. Oziel's need to have his voice on tape?
Because he was afraid of Dr. Oziel.
What was he afraid of Dr. Oziel?
Because Dr. Oziel could send him to jail. Dr. Oziel had information.
Okay, well, wouldn't that then create in Lyle Menendez a motive to mitigate his responsibility for the murders when he talked on tape on December the 11th?
Well, he did mitigate. He mitigated the entire story, as near as I can tell. He didn't tell us what happened. It wasn't until much later when he's in jail that he begins to tell us about what really happened inside that family.
Now, when he talks about he and his brother discussing killing the mother and then sleeping on it for a couple of nights, do you consider that to be mitigation?
No, I consider that to be, in a sense, the truth of what happened at the last week. There is this fear, there's this anxiety, there's ambivalence, they're not sure what's going on. They buy the guns, they wait for a while, they go up and down in what's happening.
So here at page 42, do you have the page, Dr. Conti? I'm
Yes, ma'am,
referring
what
now.
line?
What line?
Starting at line 6, Your Honor. Are you ready, Dr. Conti?
Yes,
I mean, do you have the
I haven't heard a
cross-reference?
question.
Right, I thought you were looking at your other
Oh,
notes.
no, I just did on this, thank you.
Dr. Conti, referring at line 6 now, where Lyle Menendez says in his own voice on this tape, there was no way I was going to make a decision to kill my mother without Erik's consent. So you say that that particular sentence works in with your theory that this was a crime committed out of fear?
No, that's not the line you asked me about.
All right,
You
well-
asked me about the line, I just let him sleep on it for a couple days, and one possibility is that that is a reflection of, in fact, what happened.
Isn't there another possibility that this was premeditated and not something born out of fear?
Well, if that's true, it's not consistent with anything else I've learned in my time on this, involved in this case.
But you saw Lyle Menendez after he'd been in custody for almost 2 years and was charged with a capital offense, correct?
That's correct, but I don't think that Lyle Menendez could fake the things that he told me. I don't think he knew to fake the things that make me believe what his life was like. He would not know to do it, and I don't think he could go read a book to do it.
Referring now to page 44, starting at line 24.
Yes.
Okay, where he indicates at the end of line 24, because even the planning out of this, the reason it took such a short period of time to figure it out was, one, because it could have happened at any moment, and then it goes on to the next page, all the thinking beforehand was done.
Yes.
All right. Now, when he uses the word planning, then, does that somehow work in with your theory that this was a crime committed out of fear?
It could, yeah. Let me get my... This is hard because I stopped reconciling before I got here. Yeah, I'm sorry. What was the question?
All right. The question is, that particular interchange there, when he uses the word planning, do you think that is consistent with your theory that this was a crime done out of fear?
Well, planning of self-defense would be consistent with this. But again, if you take one line out of this entire, what I've already said, I think is an unreliable document, and why it is unreliable, I cannot necessarily reconcile every line. But if you look across this with what is described, I don't think reconciling it is that difficult.
You don't think reconciling it is that difficult?
That's what I said.
All right. You indicated that you felt that that Lyle Menendez was trying to mitigate or minimize his conduct during the course of this tape, correct?
I assume that could be possible. You asked me if it was possible. I didn't say that he was.
Well, doesn't it appear when he's talking about giving his mother a break and killing her, that he's trying to say that really this was a mercy killing and it was not something that he should be really held accountable for?
That was Dr. Oziel's theory, and he was trying to give Dr. Oziel his theory, because the charge of this session, as I understand it, was to get his voice talking about the death of his parents on tape so Dr. Oziel would be less anxious.
And during the course of this time, there's a lot of minimizing of Lyle Menendez's conduct in his own words, correct? Where he talks about, well, my mother was suicidal, and I was really glad to see the relatives came around and said, yeah, Mom couldn't have lived without Dad. You're familiar with that portion
Yeah, but
of the
those are
tape.
different things. First of all, it just doesn't make any sense that he would be calling mother's behavior of 2 years or more in the past to explain what happened in '89. That's Dr. Oziel's theory of what happened, and what Dr. Oziel wanted was his theory on tape. Now, if you look at the line, why he's angry with the relatives, that he may be angry at the relatives for a number of reasons, including the fact that the relatives ignored what was happening in that family for so long. I don't see that as minimizing. I mean, he says he did it, and he says he did it for this, what I find implausible theory of mercy killing. That's not minimization to me.
Self-defense is, though, isn't it, Doctor?
Self-defense is a concept with a law that the law in California recognizes.
Did you talk to Lyle Menendez yesterday about why he didn't just tell Dr. Oziel what he told the jurors? Did you ask him that question?
I didn't ask him specifically, no.
Okay. Now, you indicated then that Lyle Menendez didn't trust Dr. Oziel, but he wanted to give Dr. Oziel what Dr. Oziel wanted.
Yes.
Okay. Can you reconcile those two things?
Yes. Dr.
Okay.
Oziel, there are many things. First of all, Dr. Oziel had information that could put Lyle into great trouble. And so keeping Dr. Oziel secure or not unanxious was important. Lyle was also worried about his brother, who was suicidal. And it's clear from the tape how emotional Erik is. And if some idea, for example, that Mom really wanted to be killed makes Erik feel better, then Lyle will go along with it.
And do you think that him saying that Mom needed to be killed because she was suicidal might make him feel better too, Lyle Menendez?
It might make him feel better, yeah.
Going on to page 46 of this particular transcript, starting at line 5. Lyle Menendez says at line 5, and this is after a discussion of the killing of the mother and the talking that went into it, he says, almost as if a third party was discussing. Did you consider that at all psychologically significant, that he would describe talking about killing his mother as if a third party was doing it?
Well, I don't really think that's the gist of that. I think that entire section after Dr. Oziel's effort to get the boys, especially Erik, to say, I love you, I think that whole speech, we might call it, by Lyle is his effort. He's concerned. His brother's getting emotional. They've been there for some number of hours, and it's all talked out, and all of a sudden Erik is getting emotional. And I think what Lyle was doing was try to do exactly what Oziel did as quickly as he could to get it over with. And in fact, shortly thereafter, for some unknown reason, the tape ends.
Did you ever talk to Dr. Oziel about this tape?
No.
And do you know if Lyle Menendez consulted with anyone before he made this tape?
He consulted with Dr. Oziel and his brother.
Do you know if he consulted with anyone else before he made the tape?
On that day?
Or and the week before?
We're going
Yeah.
to object to this question. Has to approach.
Dr. Conti, what things did you do once you found out that you were going to be returning to Los Angeles to testify about this tape in order to acquaint yourself with the methods or the means in which the tape was prepared? In other words, what things did you do to acquaint yourself with the whys and wheres of this tape?
I reviewed the transcripts from trial testimony of Dr. Oziel, or portions of it, and Lyle. I met with Lyle, consulted with his attorney, listened a number of times to the tape.
Now, Dr. Oziel's trial testimony had nothing to do with how this tape or why this tape was made, correct?
That's correct.
And do you recall in his testimony that he indicated that Lyle Menendez was interested in the ways in which Dr. Oziel could help him, Lyle Menendez, should he ever get caught?
Yes.
Did you discuss that fact with Lyle Menendez yesterday?
I don't think so. I don't recall.
Did you consider that perhaps it was Lyle Menendez who had something that he wanted to put on the tape on December the 11th of 1989?
I considered it, but that's not my understanding.
You rejected that notion?
That's my yes.
Now, when Dr. Oziel testified in front of this jury, you're aware of the fact that both of the defendants in front of this jury indicated that many of the things that Dr. Oziel said were correct.
That's correct.
Right, so he wasn't lying as to those things the defendants corroborate. Is that correct?
He was correct on some of the things he testified to, yes.
And at page 44 of this particular transcript, line 25, the planning out of this, the reason it took such a short period of time to figure it out was because it could have happened at any moment. Do you recall that portion of the tape in the transcript which deals with that?
Yes.
Okay. And so it's your testimony that the use of the word planning does not, in your mind, indicate any kind of premeditation on the part of the defendants, but somehow is, in fact, consistent with your theory that this was a crime committed out of fear. Is that correct?
Yes. I don't believe that this is a real description of events leading up to the death of his parents.
Now, at page 46, at line 25, near the bottom, there, Lyle Menendez is discussing the fact of missing his parents, and he analogizes missing his parents to missing his dog. Did you consider that at all psychologically significant, that he would liken his parents to a dog?
Yes.
And what did you think of that?
Well, I thought it was, as he says, a gross analogy. I thought it was tragic that in trying to talk about missing someone, what he calls forth is a relationship with a pet. I suppose he could have talked about one of the stuffed animals there instead of talking about some real human being, some relative or some girlfriend or someone real in his life.
Okay, so rather than showing a cold and callous nature, you'd have decided that this shows the fact that he is in fact abused. Is that correct? That he was abused by his parents?
No, I don't think that this proves that he was abused, but I think that this analogy, which is stupid and horrible, doesn't prove that he was abused, but it talks about his life, and it's consistent with the way he talked about his life as essentially not having any other human being there for him. And so the model of what it's like to miss something isn't a model of missing a human being, it's missing a pet.
All through the tape, he and his brother talk about the fact that they do have a relationship with each other, correct?
Correct.
And would you agree that the majority of the talking on that tape is done by Lyle Menendez?
Yes.
Now, at page 47, he makes reference, he's again talking in this last portion of the tape about missing this thing that he hated when it was around. And he's talking about missing his parents, and he says, starting at line 4, I miss all the things that we had a boating trip right before the incident, and it had nothing to do with the main problem, which required a lot of courage. Now, you're aware of your testimony in regards to how the boating trip played into the scenario of fear, correct?
Yes.
And in this particular portion of his monologue, Lyle Menendez makes no mention that this boating trip was in any way unpleasant, correct?
Correct.
Now,
He makes no mention of anything of the last week.
Did Dr. Oziel tell him to say that? Is there anywhere in this tape where Dr. Oziel's telling him, mention the boating trip and make it sound good?
I don't know that he did. I doubt that he did, but
And is there anything in this transcript or in the tape where Dr. Oziel is saying, say that you planned it out and that will sound good and that will make me happy? There's nothing like that, is there?
No.
And there's nothing in there about Dr. Oziel saying to them, say that you talked about killing your mother and you slept on it for 2 nighs, correct? There's nothing in there that indicates that that was what Dr. Oziel wanted to hear, is there?
no, I don't see that there's anything on here that directly indicates what Dr. Oziel wanted, other than he wanted reinforcement for what his understanding or his theory about the events were.
And this was so that Lyle Menendez could placate Dr. Oziel. Would that be fair to say?
Yes.
Now, you indicated that you had some criticism of Dr. Oziel for his dual relationships. I believe you talked about dual relationships in the terms of people becoming lovers or business partners with their patients, correct?
Correct.
Is there anything in this particular transcript or tape which indicates to you the formation of a dual relationship between Dr. Oziel and this defendant, Lyle Menendez?
Not in this tape, no.
Okay, so when you said that about the dual relationships, that there's no support for that particular conclusion of yours in this tape.
Well, again, I've said that this is a seriously flawed tape. My conclusion about Dr. Oziel's style and his work with these kids is based on much more than this one tape.
Well, are you familiar with any of the other sessions that Dr. Oziel had with Lyle Menendez?
I'm familiar with his description and Lyle's testimony about, for example, Dr. Oziel talking about how much pressure this case had put on him and how he was real good in business and had lots of business cards on his desk. I mean, that sounded to me like the development of a dual relationship. So yeah, I am aware of testimony that addressed that issue of dual relationships.
Now that we're considering Dr. Oziel because of this tape, looking at Exhibit 97, which is in front of you, did you notice all the number of times these records indicate a visit from Lyle Menendez? For instance, I believe if you look here, it says older son, 3.5 sessions on the 5th of October of 1988. Can you see that particular entry?
Yes, I do.
And would you look down there and notice that there are other entries which seem to either indicate the older son or L for Lyle?
Yes.
Okay, and you also see notations there for MM. Do you see that at the beginning of 1988?
89 or 88?
88, starting in 88, which is, I think...
Oh.
May I approach again, Your Honor?
Yes. I'm sorry, I can't find it.
Dr. Connie, on Exhibit 97, referring, I think we may just have the page incorrectly.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
1988, 9:30, and this appears to be the first entry dealing with the Menendez family. You'll see that the address originally was Park Livorno in Calabasas. It's crossed out to 722 Nordome. And it says here, 9:30, there's some sort of $150. Then it says 10-4-88 Erik, and then 10-4-MM double. Okay, were you aware of the fact that Mr. and Mrs. Menendez saw Dr. Oziel
Yes.
on occasion?
Yes.
And you're aware of the fact that the Calabasas burglary occurred in the summer of 1988?
Yes.
Okay. Were you aware of the reason why Lyle and Erik Menendez first went to see Dr. Oziel?
I assume it was because of Calabasas burglary.
Okay, why do you assume that?
I'm going to object to that, Coach.
All right.
Dr. Conte, have you been able to review Exhibit 97, which are the ledger sheets and the billing sheets from Dr. Oziel?
I skimmed through them real quickly while you were at sidebar, yes.
All right, and do you notice that there are a number of times when it appears that at least there was billing done for sessions with Lyle Menendez prior to December the 11th of 1989?
Yes.
But when you're testifying about your opinion of Dr. Oziel, what are you basing it on in terms of his notes? Are you basing it on the October 31st, well, his testimony about October the 31st and November the 2nd?
Yes.
And no other testimony?
And I'm sorry, Lyle's, and to some extent Eric's. Lyle's I remember in particular.
All right, but as in terms of actually looking at Dr. Oziel's point of view, you have that only from his testimony, which dealt with the 31st of October and November the 2nd. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Right. And so when you're talking about him talking about the dual relationship, that is not information which you got from any of Dr. Oziel's notes or from his testimony, but rather information you got from Lyle Menendez, correct?
Correct.
Right. Now, you indicated one of the things you found interesting is that in spite of Dr. Oziel's testimony about the defendants talking about perfect crime, that on this particular tape and in the transcript, there's no mention of the term perfect crime. And you found that significant, and you mentioned it in your testimony this morning.
Yes.
Right. But you were also aware of the fact that in this particular transcript and on the tape, that defendant Lyle Menendez is trying to minimize his involvement by saying he killed his mother out of mercy. Right?
Well, it's good. Yeah, you characterized minimizing it, and I said that was possible. I don't think that's what was going on, but it's possible.
It's also possible that when he talks about planning to kill his mother, that really is a sign of premeditation and not a sign of planning to be afraid of her, correct?
It's possible, but it's not consistent with everything else I've learned in this case.
Now, you indicated that there was no hatred expressed on the tape or something to that effect this morning.
Something to that effect. I think what I said is that there was not a great deal of hatred expressed. There were several places where the word hate was used.
Well, if Lyle Menendez, if this tape ever came into court, and Lyle Menendez was aware of the fact that this tape someday might come into court, correct?
Correct.
And if this came into court and he talked about hating his parents a lot of the tape, that wouldn't help him out too much, would it?
I suppose it would depend on what the theory was.
The theory of the defense, right?
Right.
Okay. Now, at page 10, at line 8 of the transcript that we all have, do you see there at line 8 on page 10 that he talks about it being very angry with his mother because he was trying to help her, and yet he was ended up being put in a position of defending things that his father was doing to him?
Yes.
Okay. So there was there at page 10 an expression of anger, which is not the same of hate, but it is, would you agree, a negative emotion?
It's a negative emotion, and one of the things that I thought was quite interesting in that is that he talked about it with exactly the same tone that he talked about everything else in the tape.
Did you consider his tone of voice in the tape to be at all disturbing to you?
Yes.
And it appeared to be rather matter-of-fact, wouldn't you agree?
Matter of fact, potentially dissociative, or as if he were going through something which didn't have a great deal of significance to him.
Did you consider the fact that that might be a sign that he was somewhat asocial or antisocial?
I did, but that doesn't fit with over 50 hours I've spent with him.
Okay. So nothing about this really fits with what you've already testified to. Would that be fair to say?
Well, yeah. I mean, given the context, given what I think it was, given what I think was going on, I mean, some of it, I suppose, is consistent, but that particular, your characterization of his lack of affect, I don't think fits with what I know about him and my contact with him. Excuse me.
But you would agree that this tape shows a lack of affect, correct?
Yes.
Would you describe to the jury what lack of affect means in psychological jargon? What does that terminology mean?
In jargon?
No, in psychological, whatever vocabulary.
Okay. A lack of affect would be to talk with a somewhat monotone, not communicating any affect or emotion in tone of voice or tonality or up and down in the voice.
At page 16, line 3. At the first full sentence, that would anger me. Again, he's expressing anger about his mother. Is that correct?
Yeah, let me find it if I can. Yes.
And then again at page 18, line 26, he talks about he'd get close to his mother and then he'd hate his father. Do you see that there at page 18 and line 26?
Yeah, and then he talks that's in the same segment where he then later talks about feeling close because they watched the Super Bowl together.
So he's expressing conflicting emotions about his father. Is that correct?
Yes, that's a genuine expression of his feeling.
Okay. Now, is it unusual for people to both hate and love their parents? Is that an unusual thing for people to have?
Well, it is actually quite unusual to hate your parent. To have strong negative feelings, to be angry at, to be mad at, and to love is not inconsistent. I'm not sure that a child can actually hate a parent.
You're not sure a child can hate a parent?
Right.
Have you ever known any children who said that they hated their parents?
I know lots of, yeah, but I thought we were talking in a psychological sense. Sure, I mean, I know kids every day say, I hate you. But to real, absolute hatred, which is total rejection of the other person, beyond anger, it is a rejection of the other person psychologically. I think it's very difficult for kids because kids tend to be ambivalent. They'll be angry, but they'll be in love. They'll want to be independent, but they'll also be dependent.
Now we're talking about children, right?
Children and adults, it's the same thing. Those relationships continue regardless of the age of the person. Certainly, children or adult children can have strong negative feelings. The role of hatred, though, has I think, a special importance in psychology, and that's why I was suggesting that it's very difficult for an adult child or a child to absolutely hate a parent.
Referring now to page 46, starting at line 12, Dr. Conti.
Yes.
He indicates at the end of line 12, I remember when we had to go down wherever to take care of an important issue concerning, he said, quote, I can't do it. I've got to practice because I have a tournament coming up. And he was completely blocking out. Now, you're aware that Lyle Menendez there is referring to his brother Erik, correct?
Yes.
He's referring to an incident where they had to take care of some issue, which he doesn't specify, and his brother is saying, I've got to practice, I've got to practice. Do you see that there? Okay, do you recall the testimony from both Lyle and his brother about the Friday morning when they went to go get the guns in San Diego, that his brother was out practicing, and Lyle came out and said, hey, this may look like a new day, but we've got some serious issues. Do you see this as a reference to the trip to San Diego?
It could be. If this is an accurate and a reliable document, it could be.
When you say an accurate, reliable document, do you have any reason to believe that this transcript does not reflect what's said in the tape?
No, that's not what I was referring to. I have to think I've been through this several times. I understand that this is an accurate transcription of what's on the tape. The question is, what's on the tape? And who wanted it, and who created it, and whose needs were being met by it. I don't know for sure that this is a reference to that Friday morning.
Did you talk to Lyle Menendez about that yesterday?
Not about this, no.
And when you saw that particular reference, did you say to yourself, boy, that kind of looks like what they testified to about Friday morning,
Yes.
August the 18th? You thought that to yourself?
I may have one of the times. I've been through the tape so many times.
Now, did you ask Lyle Menendez why he didn't just tell Dr. Oziel that this was a crime done out of fear?
Yes.
And did you discuss that fact with him?
Yes.
Okay. And did you also consider the fact that if, in fact, that Lyle Menendez was just telling Dr. Oziel what Dr. Oziel wanted to hear, that Lyle Menendez was lying all through this? Did you consider that?
I considered that he was fulfilling what Dr. Oziel wanted, yes. And in fact, that was to provide information that was a lie.
And so Lyle Menendez was making, in your opinion then, when he's talking about his mother and her suicide and he was just trying to help her out, when he said, I was just trying to help my mother out and it was really an act of courage to kill my mother, so he was lying about that?
Well, you mentioned a number of things. I think what he was doing was to draw on old information, real experiences that described his mother's emotionality some years before. He was providing information, drawing on real-life experiences to comply with or to fulfill or fill out Dr. Oziel's theory about why the murder took place.
But Lyle Menendez was adopting this theory as his own during the course of this
He
tape.
was signing on to it because it was vital to him to do that and because he was concerned about his brother and he wanted to see if his brother would get any assistance from Dr. Oziel.
Okay, you said it was vital for Lyle Menendez to sign on to Dr. Oziel's theory.
Dr. Oziel was a threat.
Wouldn't it be just as likely that it's vital for Lyle Menendez to sign on to this theory of self-defense because the people of the state of California and the criminal justice system are now a threat?
That's right, but to do that requires him to do what was impossible for him to do at that time, which was to reveal what really was going on in that family. And he wasn't ready to do that, and this is certainly not the person he was going to do that with.
But my point is, Dr. Conte, you're saying that Lyle Menendez adopted all these statements which were in fact not true in order to satisfy the needs of Dr. Oziel.
I didn't say that. I didn't say all the statements weren't not true. I just said that he drew on some things that were true but were several years old.
And he used them as justification for killing his parents.
In a theory that was not true because it was Dr. Oziel's.
Why couldn't he have done the same thing for this jury then? Draw on experiences, elaborate on experiences in order to satisfy a theory of self-defense. He could have done that in this case for this jury, couldn't he?
Well, it certainly is possible. I'm not a human lie detector, but based on, I don't even know how many hours it is anymore, but it seems like a lifetime of involvement in this case. I don't think that he made up the essential details of his experience. You know, it is certainly possible, but I do not believe it. I wouldn't be here in this public forum going through this if I thought there was the slightest possibility of that. The essential story about what happened in that family, I do not believe is made up. And I can't have any scientific way to prove it, and you have no scientific way to disprove it. But everything I have heard convinces me that what took place in that family did in fact take place, and it was abusive.
And as well, that Lyle Menendez killed his parents out of fear on August the 20th of 1989.
That is my belief, ma'am, yes.
That is your belief, correct?
That's right.
And you're being paid in this case, correct?
No, I'm not being paid.
You're doing this for free?
I got paid 70 hours in 1992 for over 500 hours of work, not even including the time I've been down here. If you actually factor in the money I've lost because I've had to cancel paying clients, it's somewhere below what Dr. Hart was getting paid. I imagine about $7 an hour. And I would not stake my reputation and would not participate in this at any price, but let alone $7 an hour.
Now, you just indicated that it is your belief that the family was abusive and that these things happened and that you're not a human lie detector, correct?
I'm not a human lie detector, but the story that I have heard, I do not believe was made up.
Right. If any of the vital facts of the story between August the 15th and August the 20th are not true, in other words, if Erik Menendez really knew all along that his brother wore a hairpiece, would that be something that might change your opinion, do you think?
It might, sure.
And if it turns out that they bought the movie tickets before the movie and not afterwards, would that change your opinion as to what had happened?
I would have to consider that changed fact in the entire constellation. It is conceivable that any fact could change my opinion if, in fact, it were demonstrated or proven to me that I had placed improper weight on it, or I had misconstrued it, or in fact had given it greater weight than I should.
And if there were evidence that Lyle Menendez had his girlfriend get books out of the library or do some research on child abuse, would that change your opinion as to the viability of him being able to fabricate
No,
this
I
for
consider
you?
it fabrication. I don't think what he told me, especially the things that are more important in my assessment of his credibility, I don't think you will read in books.
And this particular transcript and the tape that you heard here in court today and over the last several days does nothing to change your opinion that Lyle Menendez killed his parents out of fear and not out of premeditation. Is that your testimony here in court today?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Conte.
Thank you.
We also
Dr. Conte, when you first became aware of the information contained in the November 2nd session with Dr. Oziel, you knew that the theory that was suggested there was that Mrs. Menendez was killed because she was suicidal and Mr. Menendez was killed because he was mean to Mrs. Menendez. Is that correct?
Yes.
Objection leading.
It's foundational, Your Honor.
Overruled.
When you heard that that was the theory that came out of November the 2nd, did you examine that along with all other possibilities as a possible explanation for what happened in this case?
Yes.
Did you examine all theories to see if you could figure out what happened in this case, what the motivation was for the killing?
Yes.
And when you heard that Dr. Oziel, the theory out of Dr. Oziel's session was that Mom was suicidal in 1986 and 1987 and continued to be troubled, although less suicidal, in 89. And Dad was mean to her, despite the fact that there was evidence that Dad was now being much nicer to her. Did you evaluate whether that theory made any sense?
I did.
And what was your
I
conclusion?
don't think it makes any sense.
Why?
Well, first of all, if you're going to make up a theory, you could certainly make up a more sophisticated and a better theory to explain the events, especially if, quote unquote, you're trying to be helpful.
But what did you consider that as, aha, here's the answer, here's exactly what happened? Did you think, well, maybe this is really what happened in the family?
No.
Why?
Well, because I've talked to a large number of individuals, and besides Lyle and his brother, who know this family. I've talked to the family members. They describe a family. I took into consideration what kind of a family it was and coming to my understanding of what had taken place in the case.
And did you look at all the various theories to see if that was an explanation that made sense?
Yes.
And you knew that one of the theories was that it was done for the money. Did you look at this case in terms of, is there support for that idea?
Yes.
And did you come to an opinion?
I don't find any support for it.
And did you look at this in terms of whether it was done because there was a desire to commit a perfect crime?
Yes.
What was your conclusion in that regard?
There's anything but a perfect crime, and that's not a theory that makes much sense to me. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Lyle Menendez, in his testimony on November 2nd, said that Dr. Oziel suggested the perfect crime theory, and he says, no, they never agreed to that. Is that correct?
That's what I recall.
Okay. And there's no mention in the tape of anything to do with the perfect crime. Is that correct? And Lyle Menendez indicated that when he went to Dr. Oziel on November 2nd, he told him he was not going to discuss the details, the facts of the killing itself, in terms of type of weapon, timing, anything like that. Is that correct?
That's what
Objection
I...
leading on the end of the
Objection sustained as to the form of the question is leading.
Did you find any...
The answer is true.
Did you find any support in the tape that indicated that what Lyle Menendez said was, in fact, true, that there was no discussion of details of the killing?
Objection and proper conclusion.
I think I've asked a convoluted question. May I try again, Your Honor?
Yes.
All right. Lyle Menendez testified that he had told Dr. Oziel that he was not going to discuss the details. Is that your understanding?
Yes.
And in fact, in the tape recording, does he, again, refuse to discuss details?
Yes.
Objection that characterizes the evidence.
Objection is overruled as to the form of the question. The answer will stand.
Lyle Menendez testified that Dr. Oziel was incorrect when he suggested that they said that this was a killing done without feelings. Do you remember that from his...
I'm sorry.
Lyle Menendez...
spaced out. Could you say it again?
Okay. Lyle Menendez testified... Understand. Lyle Menendez testified that... Let me start again. Dr. Oziel testified that the brothers said that this was a killing done with no feelings. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And Lyle Menendez in his testimony indicated that that was not true.
Yes.
Does the tape reflect that the killing was done with no feelings or with great emotion?
Well, again, I think the tape is an unreliable source, but I do think because of the way people communicate, and because people sometimes communicate inadvertently or unconsciously, I think there is reference to strong emotion at several points when Lyle and also Erik are talking about the killings.
Dr. Oziel testified that when Lyle Menendez came in, he was threatening and menacing, and yet on this tape, Dr. Oziel characterizes Lyle Menendez's behavior as being hurt and feeling violated.
Yes.
Is that correct? Did that characterization of his behavior on October 31st support what Lyle Menendez had told you and what he told these juries about his reaction to his brother revealing this information?
Well, yes, given my feeling about the tape, which I won't keep repeating, yes, it does.
Now, on November 2nd, after that session, there was an agreement to this theory of Dr. Oziel's in particular areas. One, that the killing of mother was to help her because she was suicidal. Is that correct?
Yes.
Objection, leading.
Sustained. The answer is stricken.
Do you find anything in this tape that was not already agreed to by the brothers in the November 2nd session
Objection, calls for
with,
sorry.
with regard to the motivation for the killing of the parents?
Objection, calls for improper opinion.
Sustained.
Mrs. Bazanich asked you if this changed your opinion, if seeing planning mentioned in the tape didn't change your opinion, right?
I recall that.
Was planning part of the November 2nd discussion?
Objection, improper opinion.
Sustained.
Why does seeing planning in the tape not change your opinion?
Well, again, given all the caveats about the context of the relationship and the tape, it isn't always clear each time that it is mentioned exactly what is being referred to, whether it's the signing on to the sort of Dr. Oziel's theory, or it's perhaps the truth bubbling up through all of this chaos. If you were interviewing someone about whether they plan to kill someone, you would want a great deal more detail to conclude that.
All right, objection sustained. The answer is stricken. Commencing with the witness and if you were.
Sorry, Your Honor.
I guess my question is this, Dr. Conti. When in the November 2nd session, Lyle and Erik sign on to a theory of killing mother because she is suicidal, that is a planned killing, isn't
Yes.
that?
Your Honor, objection as to the characterization of signing on by the
Sustained.
defendants.
Answer stricken.
Thank you.
When Lyle testifies here in court that when Dr. Oziel said, I understand that you don't know your motivation, let me explain it to you. The reason you killed your mother was because she was suicidal. And he says, yes, that's the reason. That is the description of a planned killing, isn't it?
Yes.
And when Dr. Oziel suggests to Lyle Menendez, you killed your father because he was angry and controlling you and you could never please him, and Lyle Menendez says, yes, that's right. That's a planned killing,
Objection, leading.
isn't it?
Overruled.
Yes.
So when the tape talks about a planned killing, is it any different than what they said on November the 2nd?
Well, in that sense of planning, no, it's not.
You were asked about sessions with Dr. Oziel on the 8th and 9th. When you talked to Lyle Menendez yesterday at the jail, did he indicate to you that he had contact with Dr. Oziel about the making of this tape prior to making it? That there were discussions?
It was a phone call, I know.
Well, let me go back.
I'm tired, and so to be honest with you, I don't recall everything
Okay.
that was said.
Was it your understanding that Lyle Menendez had contact with Dr. Oziel between November 2nd and December 11th?
Yes.
And was that contact with regard to Dr. Oziel wanting to see Lyle and Erik?
Yes.
And what information do you have in that regard in terms of why he wanted to see Lyle and Erik?
Objection, calls for hearsay.
Sustained.
Your Honor, I think that the prosecution, by asking about the 8th and 9th, has opened to this area.
Well, what are you asking? What your client told the witness on an interview yesterday? Is that the
Yes, I'm asking him what his understanding
Well,
is.
that's not the correct way of phrasing it. It's not what his understanding is. It's what was told to him.
What was told to you by Lyle Menendez with regard to why that meeting was held December the 11th?
That Dr. Oziel had called and said that he was nervous, or that he had talked to Erik, and I don't recall, to be honest with you, at this point, how he communicated to Lyle, but that he was concerned that he hadn't seen them in so long, he was getting nervous, and that they should come in.
Okay. And he was nervous because he felt they weren't getting the therapy they needed, or?
No, he was nervous because he hadn't seen them and didn't know what was going on.
And what did Lyle Menendez tell you about what his fear would be if he didn't go in? What his fear was of what would happen if he didn't go in on the 11th?
That Dr. Oziel would go to the police.
So is that your understanding why he went in on the 11th?
Yes.
His primary reason?
Yes. Well, that and concern for his brother. His brother was suicidal, and was concerned about getting help for Erik.
Was the primary reason, though, the idea that Dr. Oziel
Yes.
wanted to see him and he needed to see him? And he had other reasons as well?
Yes.
And you were asked by Mrs. Bazanich about Lyle's having been involved in this burglary in 1988. And you
Yes.
said that you thought that it represented a significant problem.
Yes.
And what did you mean by that?
Well, I don't think kids, young men, burglarize homes in their neighborhood without some deep personal or family problem, especially families that have resources where there is no real-world survival interest being met. I don't like the term cry for help when it's applied to an act like that, but some people refer to it some mental health professionals as a cry for help. Pay attention to me, there's something wrong.
Okay. He's indicated that he's tired, and it is 10 after 3.
Thank you.
You were asked whether Lyle and Erik had told Dr. Oziel about the abuse in the family.
Yes.
Now, there was some discussion about the controlling, domineering nature of the father. You had said no, they didn't tell him about the abuse. What was it you were referring to?
They didn't talk to Dr. Oziel about their abuse, sexual and physical.
When you were asked by Mrs. Bazanich about the reference to the decision with regard to Mom and talking about Mom and the implications of...
Just use the pronoun there. His mother.
His mother, I'm sorry.
Nature.
The implications of killing their mother. Did you talk to Lyle about that particular passage and in terms of what was going on with he and his brother and thinking about the implications of buying guns and acting in self-defense and what would happen if Mom was part of it, if the mother was part of this?
I'm sorry, I don't recall what passage we're talking about.
It's page 42.
Which line?
Page 42 on line 6 said there's no way I was going to make a decision to kill my mother without Erik's consent.
Yes.
Now, did you talk to Lyle Menendez about that particular statement in reference to their being afraid and what would happen if they did take action? Let me rephrase it.
I may have, but I don't recall now.
Okay, if this will help you. Did Lyle Menendez reflect any difference in attitude toward defending himself against his father versus defending himself against his mother?
Objection made.
You're asking him to tape in that passage?
No, I'm asking about that passage. If when he talked to Lyle Menendez about it, Lyle Menendez explained that there was a difference in how he felt about protecting himself against his father versus protecting himself against his mother.
Do you understand the question?
I do, and it was an issue that was talked about throughout my time with him, but I don't recall specifically now what he told me. I'm sorry.
Did he seem to have different feelings with regard to protecting himself against his mother as opposed to taking action against his father?
Well, I sure think it was his relationship with his mother was much more ambivalent. He wanted always for her to just be Mom, just to love him, and he was willing. He testified, and I think I mentioned it as well. He was willing to, have her come back and sort of write off Dad, come back to Princeton, and I'll take care of you. So I think he had an incredibly ambivalent relationship with his mother.
When you talked about whether the Erik and Lyle would be in a position to discuss the true facts of the family situation with Dr. Oziel, you made some reference to dual relationships. And did you have information that Dr. Oziel was involved with Lyle and Erik on other levels other than as their therapist, supposedly?
Yes.
And what information was that?
All right, it has already been covered on direct.
I believe the area was explored again on cross, Your Honor.
Well, it's already been covered. He answered that when you asked the same question on direct.
Mrs. Bazanich pointed out places within the transcript in which Lyle Menendez talked about being angry or hating. Did he also talk about loving his parents?
He did.
And did he talk about getting angry with his brother?
He did.
So he was angry with his brother that he went to Oziel, and he talked about being angry with his brother on other times. Is that correct?
That's correct, but that's a figure of speech that refers to a whole wide range of emotion.
So a lot of people use the word, I was angry, or I hated it when somebody did this. Is that correct?
Yes.
So when you saw the words in this transcript or heard them on the tape that he was angry with his mother, did you form the opinion that he killed her because he was angry with her?
No.
Was that consistent with the idea that he was killing her because he felt sorry for her?
I suppose it's consistent. Again, anger, anger refers to a whole range of emotions. A child can say, I'm angry at you, and it can be a relatively minor feeling.
May I have just a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
Do you have the ledger card up there?
Yes, ma'am.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
This is actually showing you the dates. 12/9, 12/8, 12/9, it says 12/11, E&L. Appears to say 9 1/3 sessions,
Yes.
$700 each. Now, does that refer to the length of time? When someone reports, when a therapist reports their billing and number of sessions?
Yes, although I believe Dr. Oziel testified that his sessions were 45 minutes in length, so presumably that means 9 1/3, 45-minute sessions.
On December the 11th.
Yes.
And the tape is approximately 1 hour of that?
Yeah, it's closer to 45 minutes when I timed it, I think.
And you indicated that you felt that there was a lot of inconsistency in this particular tape in terms of saying things such as Lyle saying that he saw his father cry and then saying he never saw him cry. On page 18 of your transcript, and I don't have the number in the renumbered transcript that the jury has, but I believe your notes.
It would be, I believe, either 28 or 29 in the jury's transcript.
Okay, page 28, line 5. And Erik is speaking here, and he says, I may not have had a choice at the time. And then later on that same page, page 19, I almost had no choice to do what I did.
Yes.
Remember those references?
Yes.
Do those make sense in the context of the theory that's being put forward here about killing Mom out of pity?
No.
Are there throughout this transcript and these tapes statements such as that which are inconsistent with the theory that they are acting to just put their mother out of their misery?
Yes.
Sustain the answer.
Did you find a number of statements within this transcript which suggested that the motivation for the killing of the parents was other than the underlying theory that was being put forward?
Yes, given all of the caveats about the quality of the tape.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
You may resume your direct examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Burgess, I think we were at somewhere in the range of page 39 or 40 yesterday. What I would like you to do is focus, if you will, on page 39. The jurors don't have the transcripts, Your Honor.
Okay, well, see if we can track them down here.
All right, let's be sure we have the right one.
All right.
Okay, with respect to page 39, I think you've already testified to that section starting on line 24 about the breach of confidentiality. I want to call your attention, though, to what Dr. Oziel is saying before that about what we're starting on line 17. What we're really doing is trying to help you undo what happened and help you create what never got created, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes.
Now, do you have an opinion with respect to the appropriateness of this supposed therapeutic goal as stated by Dr. Oziel in this segment?
Yes.
And would you tell us what that opinion is?
My opinion is, especially on the words undo what happened, there is no way that one can undo what has happened, and that's a a dismissing, if you will, of the facts of what has happened in this family, and that's certainly not therapeutic to not deal with that.
And is the issue here, from the therapeutic standpoint, is the issue of these two young men in the circumstance that brings them to Dr. Oziel is the issue the working out of their relationship, or is the issue otherwise, as you read this?
Objection, cost-effective.
Sustained.
From a therapeutic standpoint, what is the presenting issue, if you will, as presented by both patients to Dr. Oziel?
Objection, relevant.
At what time? What is it that you're referring to?
As presented in the early stages of this tape recording.
I mean, just isolated on the tape recording itself and nothing that preceded it?
Yeah, just isolate on what are the issues that are coming up in this therapy session.
On this tape recorded portion
Right.
that you have before you, it's limited to that. Do you understand the question?
Yes, I do.
And what are the issues?
The issues are that the parents have been killed, that the parents are dead, and that is the issue.
And what about the feelings of the patients about that? Is that an issue?
Well, that would be what the therapy would try to explore and go into, is all of the circumstances around that issue, feelings, thoughts, and behaviors.
And I think you've already testified yesterday that if you can explore those things, the next step would be trying to get these patients to do what's appropriate given their feelings, which is to go to the police.
Yes, that's true.
So the issue isn't how they relate to each other.
No, and it isn't just exploring feelings, but the clear intent would be to move forward in the next step, which would be to go to authorities.
Your Honor, may we approach please on that?
Yes. The last two questions and the last two answers are stricken. You may proceed and ask your next question.
Thank you. Dr. Burgess? Turning your attention to page 40. You recall that at the bottom of page 39, Dr. Oziel, in your opinion, breached confidentiality by telling Lyle Menendez how much Erik loved him based on things Erik said when Lyle was not there.
That's correct.
And is there another breach of confidentiality at the top of page 40 with Dr. Oziel telling Lyle that Erik's got all kinds of problems with having anything to do with any money and anything as a result of all this, and he's feeling really, really guilty and badly about it?
Yes, that is the second place.
Now, going back to the notion of cues, if you will, that were ignored here, I'd ask you to turn to page 41. And this is just a very, very long monologue, if you will, by Lyle Menendez. It begins on 41, and it ends, I believe, on 43. But in the course of this statement, do you notice on line 15 of page 41, Lyle makes a statement that the burden seemed to continually be handed to me. Erik handed me it to talk to Mom. Did that appear significant to you, just in the context of, in a situation of therapy, looking for things that don't seem to fit what else you're hearing?
Yes, the statement burden, we'd want to know what burden he was talking about.
The information that he's given here about this, the so-called old news about the 1987 condition of the mother, was there anything in that recitation that precedes the statement that somehow he was handed a burden of having to talk to the mother?
Objection, mischaracterizes the evidence.
Sustained.
Was there any identification that you can recall prior in the session as to what this burden of having to talk to the mother was?
The burden refers back to the suicide note back on early on, about page 2.
Objection, move to strike. Speculation on harm witness.
Sustained. The answer is stricken.
Well, in your following this, that's one interpretation that could be given to that, is it not?
Correct.
Objection is sustained.
Do you have any understanding, based on what's preceded this, about what are these burdens that are continually being handed to Lyle Menendez?
Objection, calls for speculation.
Sustained.
If you were the therapist conducting this session and the patient made the statement, the burden seemed to continually be handed to me, is that something that you believe should have been followed up?
Yes, I do.
Now, again, turning to page 42, if you look in the middle of this long monologue, at this point, somewhere around line 15, Lyle Menendez is saying he feels angry towards his relatives. Why didn't they do something when they knew what was going on and I didn't? And then he makes the statement, and when I found out, I did something about it. I did what I thought my mother would want me to do, which is, he goes on to say, which is kill her.
Yes.
Correct? Now, given the context of what he has been saying, that this was a mercy killing in 1989, is this a statement that as a therapist you would want to follow up? What does he mean when he found out he did something about it?
Yes.
So you're understanding the mother wasn't killed in 1987.
That's correct.
Now, turning your attention to page 43. This is towards the end of this statement. And on line 12, first of all, does it appear that Lyle Menendez sort of is changing the subject throughout the course of this monologue?
Yes.
Sustained, answer stricken.
In reading it, are there shifts in topic?
Yes, there are.
And when you get to line 12 of this monologue, he makes the statement that it was a very, then a dangerous situation.
Yes.
Now, is that language that you would want to follow up on when you're dealing with two young men who have killed their parents, and
Yes.
they're trying to talk to you about reasons?
Yes, you would, because of the word that is used. That's a powerful word, a strong word, and one always tries to follow up on powerful words.
And in your opinion, is that cognitively dissonant with the notion of a decision to carry out a mercy killing?
Yes, it is.
Does a mercy killing present as a dangerous situation?
That's correct.
Does a mercy killing?
It's not a dangerous situation. That's what it's incongruent with what has been said.
And then do you notice here on line 17, after this very lengthy monologue by Lyle Menendez about killing of the mother and the mother situation, is Erik in any way saying anything that ties into this monologue that Lyle has just given?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
What does Erik say there at line 17?
All right, it's there. We can all read it.
Is his reference to asking about whether his mother was rushed to a hospital once, is that logically follow what Lyle has just said, in your opinion?
Objection improper.
Sustained.
Can you find anything in the preceding speech, if you will, of Lyle's that relates to the mother going to the hospital?
Objection calls for speculation.
Yes, we can read that ourselves.
If you were the
Determination.
therapist at this session and this patient had come out with something that seemed totally unrelated, would you follow up on it?
Yes, I would.
Does Dr. Oziel, in fact, say anything
No, he doesn't.
over the course of these 3 pages? And in fact, going on to page 44, Lyle Menendez starts another fairly lengthy set of statements. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, I want to call your attention to the bottom of page 44, starting at line 24. First of all, he's talking about, is he not, his relationship with his brother. And then he says, even the planning out of this, the reason it took such a short period of time to figure it out was, one, because it could have happened at any moment. You see that language?
Yes, I do.
And then I want you also to consider the language that Lyle uses on page 45, starting at line 7. We knew what we felt, and we knew everything about that. Honestly, I never thought it would happen.
Yes.
Okay? Now, Dr. Burgess, you testified previously that you conducted an analysis, if you will, according to the FBI protocols, of the crime scene and formulated the opinion that it was a disorganized crime scene that was inconsistent or incongruent, if you like, with the notion of planning. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, here in this 47-page transcript, here on line 25 of page 44, Lyle Menendez uses the word planning.
Yes.
Correct? Does this statement by Lyle Menendez from page 44, line 24 through 45, line 8, is that inconsistent with or in any way cause you to change your opinion that this was an unplanned homicide?
No, it does not change my opinion.
And would you explain why it does not?
The reason for that is that the happened at any moment is clearly a reactive response. That isn't something that is consistent with planning.
Excuse me, I removed the strike. It's clearly a reactive response is being speculation on the part of the witness.
Sustained, the
Well,
answer
this
is
is your
stricken.
opinion, is it not?
Sustained, the answer is stricken.